Good evening.
Good evening and welcome to Deep Space Wine. I'm Kat and I'm a complete newbie to Star Trek Deep Space Nine, watching it for the very first time. And this is Tim, who has fond memories of watching it when it first screened in the UK in the 1990s. In this podcast, we're analysing each episode of Deep Space Nine one scene at a time, discussing the plot, the script, the acting, the sets, the directorial choices, and anything else that makes our nerdy little minds sparkle with glee or scowl with distaste. Tonight we'll be discussing Season 1, Episode 18, Duet, which first aired on the 14th of June 1993. And Tim, I think you've got some information about who made the episode, and then a plot summary for us.
Indeed, I do. Give me 5 seconds, as the old tablet is misbehaving. Where is it? But yes.
Bloody Cardassian tech.
I know. Almost every episode seems to involve us having some kind of technological issue as we go along.
It's extremely Star Trek.
It is, isn't it? Unfortunately, neither is a Chief O'Brien, so we have trouble resolving our way out of these situations. Right, here it comes. So, yes, I shall run through the synopsis of this episode. Oh, that is one. And then we shall give a little bit of background information, and then Kat will very much lead us through a content warning discussion, which we think is very important for this episode. Okay, so here we go. A freighter docks at Deep Space Nine, so one of its passengers may receive treatment for a condition called Kalanora, which was caused by a mining accident at a brutal labour camp called Galatep during the occupation of Bajor. As the patient is a Cardassian, Major Kira has the man arrested as a war criminal, only to find his name, Armin Maritza, is not listed for any crimes. Station Commander Benjamin Sisko sees no option but to release Maritza, but Kira is adamant. Maritza is a Cardassian who was present at Galatep, which is reason enough. Sisko decides to investigate further and has the man held in custody. Citing a conflict of interest, Sisko asks Kira to remove herself from the case, but her emotional plea and a promise that she will remain professional convince him to let her continue. When she interrogates Maritza, he says that he was only a file clerk at Galatep. A photograph from Galatep reveals that the man being held is not Armin Maritza, but Gul Dahil, the butcher of Galatep, who reportedly murdered thousands of Bajorans. When confronted with this information, the prisoner apparently admits to being Dahil. Kira is shaken. Dahil seems convincing. However, inconsistencies in his story begin to stand out. Gul Dukat, the Cardassian former prefect of the occupation, asserts that Dahil is dead. His funeral was widely attended, and half of the Cardassian population viewed his body in state. Furthermore, Dahil was not at the mining camp on Bajor during the Kalanora disaster, and thus could not possibly have the syndrome. Dr. Bashir also discovers that the prisoner has undergone cosmetic surgery, leading Kira to realise that he is indeed Maritza, but he is impersonating Dahil. Kira confronts the prisoner with this information. Maritza eventually breaks down in tears, branding himself a coward for not attempting to stop the atrocities at Galatep. He begs Kira to prosecute him as Dahil, as he intended all along, insisting that Cardassia must be forced to admit its wrongdoings, and Bajor must have the satisfaction of successfully prosecuting a Cardassian war criminal. Kira releases Maritza, realising that he is a good man, so traumatised and remorseful from his experiences that he would give up his life to make amends. Kira escorts Maritza to a ship departing from the station, but on the way out of the promenade, Maritza is suddenly stabbed to death by a Bajoran. When Kira demands to know why, the Bajoran echoes her original sentiment that being a Cardassian is reason enough. Kira, having a change of heart, asserts that it is not. A very rapid-fire run through the episode synopsis there. A little bit of background information just to kind of balance that out. This episode was originally pitched by two interns, according to Michael Piller, the executive producer of the show. Here we are. Who are Lisa Rich and Gian Carrigan Fauci, who are previously known for just 2 other Star Trek episodes. They wrote Liaisons for The Next Generation, and bizarrely enough, they wrote Move Along Home for Deep Space Nine, an episode so diametrically opposed to every aspect of this episode. I am astounded it came from the same people.
But also an amazing episode, I would like to emphasise. Geniuses both.
In your world, Kat, you are running counter to conventional...
In my very learned yes.
But yes, that is who pitched it. But obviously the episode developed further. And at this point, I'm very much going to hand over to Kat, who's going to kind of take the lead with the content warnings and extra context for this discussion and this episode. So thanks, Kat.
Thank you, Tim. Although there are interviews with Rick Berman and Ira Stephen Bear where they state that there is no single real-world people who the Bajorans were based on in Deep Space Nine, many elements of the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, as described in this episode, were deliberately written to mirror horrific real-life events, particularly and specifically the Nazi Holocaust. To quote from Wikipedia, originally titled The Higher Law and resembling an existing dramatization based on the Nuremberg trials, the story was reshaped by Peter Fields and Ira Stephen Bear with reference to Robert Shaw's play and film The Man in the Glass Booth, which tells of a Jewish man who is accused of being a Nazi war criminal. This episode, Duet, makes mention of atrocities including concentration camps, slave labour, torture, starvation, rape and murder, as well as a recurring theme of Holocaust denial and even celebration by one of its perpetrators. We will be focusing largely on what is happening between characters in this episode, on the acting, directorial and scripted choices that are made, and on the story that is played out aboard Deep Space Nine. We will be repeating some of the dialogue, we will be making mention of these very emotionally charged subjects, and we will be passing comment on how we feel they are handled in the episode. There will very likely be some slightly jarring tonal shifts. It's still an episode of Star Trek, and there are some points at which I think it's relevant for us to notice some sci-fi tropes that are used, to notice callbacks to previous episodes, but these will be mixed in with some much heavier subject matter than usual. I found some parts of this episode distressing to watch, and I was still aware of feeling upset by some of it while I was writing my notes for this podcast episode. So if any of our viewers or listeners would prefer to skip this episode of Deep Space Wine because it is largely not light-hearted, please do switch off if you need or want to. Take care of yourselves. Before we begin, thank you as always to Wikipedia for our episode summary and for some historical background information for this one, to Memory Alpha for its extensive detailing of Star Trek names, places and events, to the Star Trek Minutiae website, which has the complete Deep Space Nine shooting scripts, and to the TrekCar website for screen caps from the episode.
Excellently delivered, Kat. Not easy, but vital. I think we are absolutely going to cover some pretty tough stuff. And yeah, I can only echo Kat's very wise words, which is protect yourselves, look after yourselves, don't engage with this if you think it's going to be in any way, draining and demanding. Kat and I started this as a fun exercise. And when it becomes more of a challenge than fun, nobody should engage with it. So that's my solid advice to you all. I can only thank Kat for her eloquent way, for their eloquent way of describing how best to tackle this. Okay, so as always, we go through it scene by scene, which I think works well for us. And we kick off in Ops, where Kira is doing dockmaster duties, which I often forget she does. But she's there taking hails from incoming ships, assigning them docking berths, and it's a weirdly kind of just day-to-day job that I appreciate must happen when there's not like an emergency happening on the station. But it was a little bit surprising. I feel like perhaps maybe a more junior member of staff could just deal with this. I don't know.
Yeah, no, because I suppose the role is first screening of security threats. It's giving people docking space or not. So you do need someone who is aware of the cultural context in which she's working, who has a good overview of the different people who might be arriving at the station and dealing with the additional problems of being so close to the wormhole and potentially having ships coming in from species that we've never encountered before. So yeah, you're right. It is a bit weird seeing Kira do the day-to-day rather than what we see for the rest of the episode, grappling with the ethical dilemmas of being a Bajoran post-occupation. But yeah, it starts with midway during a conversation between Kira and Dax when they're talking about their childhoods, which I really like. It doesn't bring much to bear on the rest of the episode. It's just a random conversation they're having. I think Kira opens with, "We never much cared what we did as long as it annoyed the grown-ups."
Yes.
Which, sounds very her.
It does. And for me, it echoes previous kind of conversations these two characters have had. I think we commented on it. I'm racking my brain trying to think about a time when Dax and Kira were in a runabout travelling and we're just discussing personal activities. I think it's when Dax remarked that she thought Morn's chin hairs were cute.
I think that was just last episode, actually. It was a few weeks ago now. But
Goodness me.
Yeah, it's nice to see their friendship and dynamics being explored a bit more.
Again, it feels natural. It feels like these two colleagues would just, start to talk about their experiences, get to know each of one another. And I think they are actually, they have, complementary points of view. But notwithstanding the last episode when they were different people, and it was more Kira kind of intimidating a very spaced out Dax. That was very unusual. So this is a nice return to normality, and I really loved kind of hearing it and seeing it.
It's also a nice reminder that Dax is a trill. When Dax has said, "I was a champion window breaker on a dark night with a few rocks, I was deadly." And Kira smiles and asks her, "Which you are you talking about?"
And we don't get to hear, which again, I love, just deepens the mystery of Dax a bit more.
They then get a hail from a Kabirian freighter, the Rak Munis. We have a picture of the captain, I think. Because Kabirians did turn up in the last episode, and apparently they'll turn up in future episodes of Deep Space Nine too, according to Memory Alpha. Captain requests permission to dock. Kira directs him to docking port 6. The captain says they have a passenger on board who requires medical assistance. And this is the point at which the captain innocently replies that the passenger has a condition called Kalanora. Apparently it's chronic, but he doesn't have his medication. And Kira looks up from the controls, clearly interested by this. During this episode, there are a lot of different twists and turns in the plot. At this point, there's no indication as to exactly who the person will be. As the conversation progresses, Cisco comes in and tells the captain to beam the patient directly to the infirmary. Dax then calls to Bashir and tells him about the patient that is suffering from Kalanora, at which point Kira has a chance to explain to the others what Kalanora is. And I like the way that she frames it. She says, "The only cases of Kalanora I know of were the result of a mining accident at a Bajoran forced labour camp that I helped liberate. The survivors of Galitep have always been a symbol to us of strength and courage." And I just love that way of describing the people who were forced labour at Galitep. They are survivors. They are pictures of strength and courage. It's not a patronising, "They've been through hell and I need to help them." She's impressed by them. And I just thought that was a beautiful way of introducing them as historical figures. It's a really nice choice on the part of the writers.
I like that. I hadn't thought of it in those words, but it actually repositions them not as, passive victims, but, active survivors. And we do see some of them later, and it's just a shame they didn't get more scope in the episode, but I appreciate there's only so much you can do with 5 minutes of primetime telly. But that's great, They are, the whole narrative around them is changed like that. And I had not noticed. I also like that Cisco is more back to being a better boss than he has been erratically over the last few episodes. And he absolutely says, "Kira, go for it." And he says, "Take as much time as you need." Which I liked. I was like, he recognises not only how important this is to Kira, but clearly it's politically and culturally relevant to the people he is working with here. And he recognises that needs, therefore, special attention. And I thought he dealt with that very well, delegated it immediately to Kira, just the right approach from a boss who's been a little bit all over the map recently. But he came back for this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I came away with the feeling that all of the characters are very much in character in this episode. It feels as if it's been written very carefully, not only as a very strong standalone episode, but as a really well-integrated episode of Deep Space Nine. The characters, you know who the characters are, they know who they are and what their characters are like.
Yes.
It just feels very nicely done. We then cut to the exterior of Deep Space Nine and then to Kira exiting a turbo lift. She's walking a bit slowly. I think she has her head down. I assume that she's psyching herself up to meet the Bajoran from the camp. Nana Visitor is always a very active actor. She really inhabits Kira and gives full body to what she's doing and feeling. But when she enters the infirmary, Bashir has his back to her, but we can already see, we have a picture of this as well.
Indeed.
We can see the ridges on the head of the patient behind Dr. Bashir. So we already know that this isn't a Bajoran, this is a Cardassian. And as Bashir takes down the scanner from the face of the patient, the camera zooms in on the Cardassian's face as he opens his eyes, and then cuts to us zooming in on Kira, who calls immediately to Odo with her voice strained. Kira to Odo, I'm in the infirmary. I need security here on the double. Odo confirms he's on his way. As the incidental music, it's all minor key strings. It's very much telling you this is a bad situation. We look back to the face of the Cardassian, and his face is very hard to read. He's not emoting much. And then to Kira before we fade to black and roll the opening credits. It's a very dramatic opening.
Yes, and it's quick into it as well. It very quickly takes us from just another day in ops to, oh, this is a situation, this is clearly what the episode's going to be. It's going to be about labour camps, and then it suddenly amps up a third time. It is about labour camps, and it's going to centre on somebody who was not a prisoner in one, not a symbol of strength and survival, but an architect of it, and then crash straight into the intro. Brilliant. I mean, that is a fantastic escalation of the stakes, which I think any good episode should do, is ratchet up the tension. Each time you think you know where you are, pull the rug out from under you and take it up again. So.
Yeah, it does a great job, and it really does a great job of setting up the situation in the episode without having to do a great deal of explanation. They don't go into a whole, remember that Cardassia was occupying Bajor for a while? Well, during that time, there were no, she just explains that it was a labour camp. We know that she is Bajoran. I think even a newcomer to the episode, newcomer to the series at this point, would quickly pick up on the context of what is happening. It's very artfully written.
And there is that fine line that they have to walk, which is that they're slowly exploring the concept of themed arcs, which were not a thing in television programming at that time, and especially not in Star Trek, which is always, from the original series to all the way through the Next Generation, was always, you can pick up the story in any episode. There isn't, unless it's like a two-parter or a series finale, you can pick up what's going on within about 10 minutes. By the intro, you should know what's going on in the episode. This one, you do. As you say, all of the exposition is done briefly, but it's there, so you know the context. But if you've watched the previous episodes, you have a wider appreciation. You suddenly realise this is important to Bajor, this is the background to Kira's character, this is why Sisko and Starfleet are there. So there is a reward for being an invested watcher at this time, which I don't believe was happening. Deep Space Nine was still fighting to make an impact, to win people over. It was up against Babylon 5. It was up against the Next Generation, which was season 5 at this point. So it has competition, and it's a gamble. Will people buy in? And I think you're absolutely right. They tread a fine line here between pulling you into an episode and letting you know this is part of a bigger picture. So thoroughly enjoyed it. But please, Cats, take us on before I bog us down any further.
The next day, we're in the infirmary, and my first note is the minor key strings are still hard at it. The incidental music in this episode is by Dennis McCarthy, who also composed the theme music. He knows what he's doing when it comes to emotive music. Bashir, Kira, and the Cardassian are all on screen, looking at each other. Bashir asks Kira, "What's the matter, Major?" And Kira says, "Your patient is a criminal." The Cardassian then pushes past Bashir and jogs into the corridor, running straight into a Bajoran member of security staff who grapples with him before holding him by the collar. Odo then arrives and says, "Good afternoon," to the Cardassian prisoner, and then to Kira, "I assume this is the problem." Kira tells him to lock him up. The Cardassian says, "This is outrageous. On what charge?" And Bashir, in true Bashir form, "Will somebody tell me what's going on? This man needs medical care." And Kira says, "Then give it to him. In his cell." Every bit of this dialogue I really like. It's fast, it's snappy, it's everyone in character as who they are. The Cardassian very quietly and almost amiably says, "I haven't done anything." And Odo asks them, "Why did you run?" And the Cardassian very reasonably responds, "I'm trying to get away from this Bajoran fanatic. The look of hate in her eyes. She'd like to kill me." He sounds genuinely afraid at that point. And Odo says, "Oh, why would that be?" "Well, it's obvious. I'm a Cardassian." And this is the first very overt instance in the episode of the theme of a person being hated for their race rather than for the role they've played, be it on Galatep or elsewhere. It's an important thing which will keep coming up, and it's just very nicely brought up here. He's frightened of Kira, who is frightened of him, both of them because of their race.
Yes, precisely. Good
catch. But Kira counters with, he's not just any Cardassian, he's a war criminal. Odo and Bashir walk out of shot, presumably through the security staff, as they take the Cardassian to his cell, and the camera zooms in on Kira, who looks angry and upset.
Again, Nana visitors, wonderful expressions. She's an incredibly expressive physical actor, as we commented before. It's great. I immediately felt the conviction of what Kira was saying. You know, she is very highly strung, she's very emotional, but in this instance, you immediately are hit with the severity of what she is experiencing, and it immediately, for me, set the tone of the episode. So I thoroughly enjoyed that kind of close-up on her face.
I really love that she is the person who gets to interrogate the Cardassian character throughout, for various reasons, which I'll go into a bit more later. But she's such a joy to watch while acting. She's so intense, and she can swing from one emotion to another very realistically in a short space of time.
Precisely. It's believable in a universe that has often had kind of characters feel like they're on rails. You know, you always know how Worf's going to react. You always know how Data's going to react. You know, it's fine, you know, because we love those characters. But it largely became unsurprising when they reacted the way they did. If they reacted differently, it was because it was part of the episode. With Kira, I think she reacts differently to things because she's a complex, well-realised character. And that goes for all of the cast. Even Bashir. He will eventually develop a personality beyond, you know, amiable, bumbling fuckboy. Sorry.
I love Bashir so much.
Cat, please get us back on course.
Right, in the security office, Sisko, Odo, and Kira. Sisko asks, so you're saying this man, what's his name? And Odo names him Maritza, Amin Maritza. And Sisko says, you're saying that Maritza's on the Bajoran list of Cardassians wanted for war crimes. Odo responds, he's not on any list I've seen, Commander. I've got them all. Kira passionately says, I don't care whether he's listed or not. And Sisko interrupts her. Hold on, Major. Maritza's traveling on a Federation ship. He's come here for a medical emergency. And if we throw him into a security cell, I, for one, hope he's listed. I apologise that I will be repeating a lot of the script verbatim in this episode. It's very dialogue heavy, and a lot of what is spoken is very strictly relevant. It's difficult to do an overview of the episode without repeating a lot of it. So I apologise for the repetitive nature of it for those of you who've watched it recently. Kira responds, Commander, I know what I've done isn't exactly policy and may not even be legal, but it's right. Which is a view that I think Odo has taken before now.
It's a view I think that comes up all the way through Deep Space Nine, as you say, it's come up a few times before this. In a place where Federation policy, as we've always known and cherished it, versus Bajoran policy collides often. We also have people who act from their own moral code, which does not always align with either of those. It makes for good storytelling, but it makes it also very difficult then, and I think that's what the show does best, is it just presents you with people acting naturally, you know, according to their own code, maybe filtered through some kind of Federation or Bajoran policy, and it lets you decide who is right. So, yeah, it's a tricky one, that. It really is tricky, and I like that Kira does say, you know, I don't care whether it's via policy or even legal, it's right. That reflects Kira's experience. She fought. She didn't have any kind of code. She was a freedom fighter or terrorist, depending on your definition, with no protection of any prisoner convention, you know, fighting against a known tyrannical invader. So her internal moral compass has had to be her guide during those times. Precisely. She's had no policy or legality to fall back on, just the immediacy of action, results, right, wrong, justice, you know, merciless murder. So it makes sense, but it does definitely make it very complex to navigate.
Lieutenant the Indoor Cap points out that it's the extra legal space where morality and ethics exist.
That's the show. Welcome to the show.
So Sisko asks what they should charge him with, and Kira says, I'm charging him with having Kalanora. Sisko asks her to explain, and she says the only way he could have contracted that condition was to have served at the Galatep labour camp at the time of the mining accident. And at this point, I've made a note that I'm very glad that this is more of a crime procedural / drama episode rather than medical focused. They never describe the symptoms of Kalanora. They never have anyone insisting it could have been contracted any other way. The illness is just a plot device for placing Maritza at the labour camp during the time of the occupation, and it's never questioned. It works really well. And I think in terms of needing a plot device which tells us this guy was unquestionably at the labour camp, the disease is a very clever one. They couldn't say in the first instance, our records place him there because he's disguising his identity.
Yes,
They've made a very wise choice, I think, not to have a physical mark on his body. For example, there could have been an injury to show that he was there. And I gave this some thought. I thought that would have been an easy way to do it, a particular kind of burn, some kind of visible injury that gives an indication that he couldn't have been anywhere else. But it would have been a very... Having a physical mark that shows you were in a labour camp has only in human history applied to those who were being held there, and it's a very emotive thing, the people who were tattooed with a number and kept in the camps. There's a risk that showing a mark on Maritza's body might have carried a connotation and a heavy emotional weight which they didn't intend it to. So instead they've gone for an invisible but unmistakable illness. And I just think it was a very clever decision. It closes the question down. He was absolutely there, and we just don't look at that illness again until we're talking about him having been diagnosed with it. It's a really good mechanical choice and a really good emotional choice, I think, for making the plot work.
I think that's very wise. You would run the risk then of being bogged down with that being more of a plot element, and also having, this episode is an obvious parallel to, the experiences we discussed in the content warning, and it's just recognisable, not only to the Holocaust, but to other experiences of government-sanctioned, activities on the scale, which sadly are fairly... They have existed elsewhere in human history, and I want to make it clear as well, we're not relating this to any other events. We are positioning this as a show made 30 years ago, inspired by events that took place a prior 50 years. That's the obvious focus. But we don't want to get too bogged down with that association, because this is more about the story on the space station in the fictional universe. And you're absolutely right. I think that physical reminder would have been a difficult obstacle or element that I think the rest of the episode would have struggled to get around. You're absolutely right that it's a plot device, and normally I'm against MacGuffins that just advance the plot with no point in themselves. In this context, I think it's the right choice, because it absolutely would have just been an anchor for the rest of the episode. And you're right, for it to go then onto a procedural thriller is the right choice. So well observed. I fully agree with you there.
Thank you, Tim. So they continue to discuss the rights and wrongs of holding him. Sisko says so that makes him a war criminal just being there. And I'll just warn you, the next piece of dialogue contains mention of what the Bajorans were subject to in the camp at Galatep, and is heavily based on what happened in Nazi concentration camps. I'm going to repeat it here because it strongly sets the tone for everything that comes after it. Just be aware that it's hard to hear in the episode. So Kira, she's very quiet and becoming increasingly upset. She has tears in her eyes as she says, "Commander, if you'd been there 12 years ago when we liberated that camp, if you had seen the things I saw, all those Bajoran bodies, starved, brutalized, do you know what Cardassian policy was? Oh, I'm not even talking about the murder. Murder was just the end of the fun for them. First came the humiliation, the rape of mothers in front of their children, husbands beaten until their wives couldn't recognize them, old people buried alive because they couldn't work anymore." And then the camera follows Kira as she turns from Sisko. Her back is to him and to us. And there are, I think, unusual silent shots of Sisko and Odo in turn looking from Kira to each other. And there's no background music here, just the quiet hum of the station in the background. Sisko says, "I think I'll have a talk with our guest." And Kira, who's choked with tears, says, "I'll come with you." And Sisko says, "No, Major, better if I spoke to him alone." Sisko then leaves, and the camera pans smoothly from him through the door to the security screen, which shows him entering the holding area and its cells set in the back of the walls. We have an image of that. The style of these cells with their invisible force fields is very similar to Federation holding cells above the Enterprise in the Next Generation. I do have something to say about the fact of it being Kira who always names what is happening in the
Please do.
happened
I
in
have
Gal-
some thoughts on that scene, but please do.
um let's see. I'd positioned them late. Let's see. Yes. I'd made my notes later in the episode, but with this scene taking place here, I think it warrants mentioning it here. I've written down, I feel that this episode makes sparing but very powerful use of mentions of what happened at the Galatap camp. And I think it's important that it's always been Kira who names the atrocities that took place there. It feels appropriate both from an internal logic perspective, in terms of her being the character who holds that knowledge as a Bajoran who liberated the camp, and in terms of the episode treating its subject appropriately for its audience. It means that the events of Galatep have always been described in the episode by someone who has strong emotional connection to them. Nothing that happened at Galatep is ever listed off lightly by a Federation crew member during this episode. For example, they could have had Kira become very upset and then have Odo try to explain to Sisko what took place at Galatep. But instead, until Maritza speaks of it later in the episode, it's always Kira. And I like this because it means that the horrors are always spoken of in a tone of anger and sorrow. They're never minimized, which is crucial both for the story of the episode on its own terms and because the horrors of Galatep stand in here for the atrocities of the Holocaust and must not be minimized. But it's also important because the script takes Kira's character and her feelings about her people's suffering very seriously. No other character explains it away. She speaks for herself consistently, which was a really good choice on the part of the writers, in terms of granting dignity to her character and in terms of paying respect to the real world events that her character is grieving by proxy in the episode. I think that Kira's being one to describe the camp at Galatep and being the only one who does until Maritza does later. It's a good decision for many reasons.
I can't fault you. I think that's excellently summarised, and you're absolutely right. Even just from a purely practical standpoint, which is that our visitor is the perfect actress to convey so convincingly somebody so impacted by what she saw, by the history of that place. But you're absolutely right as well in that it is good narrative sense to do that, and that silence after from Sisko and Odo is entirely appropriate. You know, I think they approach this as spectators, not first-hand perspectives on this. They listen to somebody who has the experience. They take it on board, and then Sisko just very quietly, his entire demeanor shifts. His approach is altered, and he immediately now approaches this with the information Kira's given him, and he doesn't question it. He takes it absolutely as gospel, which of course he should. And there was no well, what do you mean clarifying? There's none of that. It's exactly what should have happened. Nobody questions it. It just immediately spurs Sisko to go, right, I will go and determine exactly what the hell is going on here. One thing I did just want to briefly return to, and I'm glad that you mentioned the line because I also made a note of the line, is Sisko's line. I'm on the wrong screen for my notes, but it is Sisko, and this is an interesting line I really wanted to kind of interrogate with you, which is, he says, "It makes you. Does it make him a war criminal just being there?" And that, for me, immediately asks one of the biggest questions, which is, what degree of involvement is culpability? And that is something that the whole episode orbits around: is how involved can you be to justify something, to make something happen, to stop something. And I thought it was a little bit odd for Sisko to say, well, if he was just there, how is he a war criminal? Because I mean, this is the question. This is why we had war trials, is to judicially assess somebody's culpability in something as horrendously big as a genocide, a Holocaust, which clearly requires a lot of involvement, just logistically. And I'm trying to be as detached and dispassionate about this as I possibly can, but I don't know. I mean, it jarred with me. I don't know that there is an easy answer to that question. I suppose it needs asking, but I can't wrap my head around the thought of somebody being there and not being culpable.
I suspect you're right. They needed the question to be posed in the episode, and Sisko, who always tries to take a balanced. Let's
Yes,
look at all
that's
the
it.
information. They don't have him say, let's look at both sides very wisely.
Oh
here.
yeah, that would be.
But yeah, I think he probably is the right person to ask that question. Is he
Mm.
culpable just by dint of having been there? We don't know what his actions there were yet. And yeah, and as you say, that question of what counts as culpability is explored further as we go through the episode, and I think is explored well.
Yeah.
I think many decisions were made in terms of deciding the role that Maritza had and claims to have had
I'll
in the
be
camp.
very interested to revisit this at the end. And once we've gotten all the way through it, I'll be interested to revisit that and see what we think. But yes, thank you. That was that on that. And I think now it's Cisco actually talking to Maritza.
Yes, Cisco approaches him in his cell and asks, how do you feel? Maritza responds, better, thank you. And Cisco finally introduces himself. Maritza says, oh, finally, the Federation to the rescue. Are you going to get me out of here? Cisco says he hopes so and asks how Maritza contracted Kalanora syndrome. And Maritza muddies the water somewhat by saying, no, he doesn't have Kalanora, he has Potrick syndrome, a very similar condition. Take the same medication, as a matter of fact, which even at this point is clearly bullshit. The freighter captain hadn't heard of Kalanora. He said that the passenger had something called Kalanora. It was made very explicit from the beginning that it was the patient, the visitor, who told him this. So Kalanora is absolutely what he's got, but he's now trying to hide that. So Cisco clarifies with him, so he didn't serve at Galatep labor camp, and Maritza laughs, says he's never been to Bajor, he was a military file clerk. He now lives on Korra 2 and boarded a freighter which, unfortunately for me, came to Deep Space Nine. We then see a Bajoran who's named in the script as Kanon, waking up in the cell opposite Maritza's and peering blearily at him. And Kanon, with a great deal of spite in his voice, says, am I still drunk, or am I in jail with a Cardassian? Odo, you're not keeping me in here with one of those. Which is a second mention of someone hating Maritza because he's Cardassian, not because he has any idea what Maritza has done. Kanon has been asleep or unconscious during the conversation. And this will be further emphasized later, but Kayron in this episode comes to be seen as the bad Bajoran actor. He doesn't know what Maritza's here for. He wasn't paying attention when Cisco was talking about the labor camp, but Kayron hates Maritza solely because he's a Cardassian. And I think at this point in the episode, the audience might be expected to sympathize with him, given what we know of the relationship between Cardassians and Bajorans, and given what little we already know about what happened at Galatep.
This is coming right on the heels of Kira's very emotive speech. You would automatically, yeah. But at the same time, you also get that jarring kick of referring to somebody of another species, in our case, another race, as one of those. I mean, it's immediately, forgive me, dehumanizing, but, use your own kind of space language equivalent.
It is, but I do think that part of the journey that the narrative is taking the viewer on is from completely sympathizing with Bajorans who hate Cardassians because their people colonized Bajor, through to the more nuanced view by the end of the episode. And I think that the sympathy that we have for Kayron at this point is an important part of setting that up. The viewer is taken on that journey as well, not just Kira.
If anything, I think as well the audience might ultimately identify with Ben Sisko, the human, middle of the room, no kind of connection to either side beyond like an abstract political one. He's here at the invitation of the Bajoran government, but he hasn't suffered a Cardassian occupation. He hasn't kind of seen them as either freedom fighters or terrorists, because the Federation has a very complex relationship, as we've seen with Ro Lauren in TNG. The Federation has a very complex relationship, and this will come back in DS9 as well. That relationship of it's complex. It's very complex because the Federation also separately has a different relationship with the Cardassian Union. They fought a small border war recently, which affected Miles O'Brien. So it is a very complex environment that we're in here.
It is. And I think in this episode particularly, because the comparison with the Holocaust is very starkly drawn. I think as soon as we have the labor camp involved, I think the majority of Western viewers' minds will go to
100%.
the biggest experience that most of our countries' families have been engaged with or aware of will have been the Holocaust. And I think that sits over this entire episode, and it does. I can only assume that it must have coloured audience experience of the episode, and will have been more heavily emotive for it. So I think that while in most intra-alien disputes, we would probably stand with Sisko, who is human from Earth, doesn't himself have any stake in it. I think in this instance, we're so heavily pressed to side with the Bajorans. And I think that is handled very well during the episode. And at this point, I think it's kind of taken for granted, and it is used to skew the direction in which we are carried with the narrative from, yes, we're fine with hating the Cardassian because he was there at the Labour camp. He is definitely culpable, through to what happens at the end of the episode. Yeah.
That's a difficult one. I think then the next scene, I believe they're in Sisko's office. Looking at my notes.
That's right, where Sisko and Bashir are
Yes.
discussing Kalanora. Bashir says that tells Sisko that Maritza definitely has it. He has all the symptoms, and he says, when I ran a lower pulmonary bioprobe, it read positive, which suggests that, as we might expect, Kalanora is a disease of the lungs, possibly similar to pneumoconiosis, which affects miners on Earth. The Labour camp was a mining camp, and we've had it strongly set up before that the Cardassian operations around Bajor were largely to do with mining. So it fits well within the world. Bashir further confirms that if Maritza had Potrix, the bioprobe would have read negative for Kalanora.
I'm not sure who that might have frozen for.
Oh. Sorry, Tim?
We just, I think, lost the signal for you there, Kat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So,
had I finished talking about pneumoconiosis?
I think you. No, I'm not sure. I think we lost the last sentence.
I'll start from where I was. We can edit it in post, apart from those who are watching live.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so Bashir has run a lower pulmonary bioprobe on Maritza, which read positive, which suggests that, as we might expect, Kalanora is a disease of the lungs, which is possibly similar to the pneumoconiosis, which affects miners on Earth. And we've had it established before that Terok Nor was a mining station. A lot of the Cardassian interest in Bajor was for mining, so it makes good sense that the Labour camp was centred around mining, and that the illness that they've experienced after an accident is an illness of the lungs.
That's a good point, actually. That is a nice little bit of background to something we've already discussed. Is largely not the motivator of the plot, but it is. It's good context. It's good grounding. It makes it more believable.
It sits well within the world. It is very well considered. So yes, they agree that Maritza was definitely at the camp. There's no other way he could have got the condition. Kira then calls to Sisko, saying that Kaval, the Minister of State, is calling. Sisko then speaks to Kaval, who is very amiable. I trust you're in good health. Things are going well on the station. And then says, I'm told you performed a special service for Bajor today. And Sisko says he doesn't follow. Kaval clarifies, you're not holding a certain Cardassian for us? And Sisko says, we are holding a Cardassian temporarily, but he isn't sure that he has the grounds to hold him even long enough to verify his identity. Kaval says that Major Kira has assumed responsibility for this matter, so the burden's off Sisko's shoulders, and Sisko disagrees. Kaval says, Commander, if this Maritza was at Galatev, we want him and we will have him. Is that clear? Sisko says, it is. And Kaval says, good. And is then genial again when he says, we'll chat soon. Good day, Commander. Sisko then sighs heavily as the scene ends. But I really enjoyed the characterization of Kaval in this scene. He's genuinely happy that a Cardassian enemy has been held. He's angry when it looks like it might go the way he wants. He presses his point. He's all smiles again at the end. He really feels like a real diplomat who's maintaining good relations with his Federation neighbor, but isn't willing to concede an important prisoner to them. His response feels very real, but didn't give the impression that this character is going to be a huge problem in the episode. It's very well acted and very well pitched, I think.
I enjoyed Kaval more even than a diplomat. I just called him a good politician because his affability, his inquiring after Sisko's health, all seems so wonderfully diplomatic, and yet doesn't feel like it has any substance of reality to it all. And I think the real Kaval is, I'll put in my notes, the bloodthirstiness he has when it looks like Sisko's not going to just hand him over. He's like, it's the most direct Kaval is in this very brief sequence is, we will have him. And it's almost like they want him so badly, they will do anything to get him, and the getting does not, to me, instill any thought that this man would be tried in a fair court, which obviously, as we know, kind of plays into.
I think that's a bit of a leap at this point. All we know is that they want to try him, as far as we know. There isn't any implication that they want him dead immediately. No. There's no bring his body back to us. They want him so that they can put him on trial.
I can see that. I guess my impression was just that he was that sudden jarring contrast from affable diplomat to direct demand. To me, hinted at.
I think we can safely say the desire on the part of Bajor to have this man here to try him is very strong.
Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. And it's such a shame that we don't see Caval again. Another brief appearance from somebody I would really rather have seen more of, but such is the way of episodic TV, I'm afraid.
Yes, we then cut to an exterior of Deep Space Nine, and then to Sisko coming down the spiral stairwell on the promenade. Kira is at a table a short way away, and Sisko asks if he may join her. Kira says that she is about to pay a visit to our friend Maritza. Sisko says he'd like Odo to handle the investigation. Kira frowns and is silent a moment before asking why. And Sisko says that Odo is their chief of security. Kira counters that Minister Caval put her in charge. Sisko points out that Caval doesn't run this station. And Kira says, and the Federation has no right to tell us how to deal with our criminals. Sisko defines him as just a traveller under suspicion and says that Kira will be welcome to him only if he is found to be a criminal. Kira says that Sisko thinks this is a personal vendetta on her part, and he agrees that he thinks she's too close to be objective. She agrees, you're right, I'm not objective, but I'm your first officer, and I give you my word I will conduct myself accordingly. Then they sit in silence for a moment, and Sisko kind of gently shakes his head, seeming uncertain. And Kira said, you once said we were friends. I'm asking you now as a friend. Please let me conduct this investigation. I owe it to them. Sisko says, you mean the victims? And Kira responds, that's right. The ones who moved too slowly and never moved again. And she looks away and looks up again with tears in her eyes and says, I'm asking for all the Bajorans who can't ask. Let a Bajoran do this. And at that moment, Sisko holds her gaze, refrain from the main theme plays. Sisko calls to Odo and advises him that Major Kira will be in charge of the Maritza investigation. I really loved that bit of dialogue. Kira's, just the ways that Kira frames it. For the ones who will never move again, the ones who can't ask. It's very powerful, and I appreciate that Sisko responds by recognizing that Bajorans have been harmed at Galatep. Only Bajorans are in a position to try and even to investigate, to work out whether this man was guilty.
I can see that. I can absolutely see that. I think there is a natural justice to that, which absolutely deserves to be recognised. At the same time, I can see Sisko's concern, which is, it's his entire character, which is what we do has to come from a place of objective duty, honour to the abstract truth, and a lot of things that, frankly, don't plug into this situation. As we've said before, Sisko doesn't have any stake in this game. He also doesn't really have that personal context, which Kira so painfully does. So it leaves him in a difficult situation. But I think for us as the audience, the only natural way forward is for Kira to get this and to investigate it truly. So it pays off as it should, although I can recognise, Sisko's initial reluctance, which is, this needs to be done properly by somebody, abstract enough. And Odo would be the natural choice, but he is right to come down and give it to Kira. What's the other thing?
I think it happens very quickly in those lines of dialogue. That change of heart had to happen very swiftly in order for the story to continue to play out. We've got 45 minutes to play out this whole drama of who this man is and whether he is guilty. And I think that using very emotive lines from Kira there achieves that very well.
And it plays so well into Kira, the character we know, and how she solves situations, which is with her whole heart and soul, striving for something. That is very Kira. I thought it was odd that she appealed to her friendship with Sisko. I would have thought that he would have been more moved by an appeal to honour and duty and the things that Starfleet has instilled in him. But I thought it was an interesting choice, especially considering
Yeah.
the very last episode, they were out of their own minds, true, but they were trying to kill each other. So I don't know that their relationship has recovered sufficiently that they could actually presume on that emerging
It's a
friendship.
good point. I suppose we could say that comes from Kira more than from him, that
Yeah,
Kira has had to forge strong bonds with people in the past, is still very
that's a
close to
really good point.
Odo, who's been
Yes,
there with her
yes,
for years.
that's a very good
And
point.
yeah, it's in Kira's nature to appeal to
Yes,
whatever amicability they have,
yes, I would
whatever
agree with
trust
that.
he has in her.
And I think then it's a testament to Cisco's faith in Kira as a person that he's like, actually, yeah, I have to do the right thing and let her do this. And I think deep down he also knows that she will, and this is something that's explored in the episode, she will do this properly because she wants justice, unequivocal justice that places the blame fairly at Maritza's feet. So she is going to strive for the truth, and that in itself will become a very complex thread through this episode. But yeah,
It will. I
great
think
scene.
the question of Kira's motivation gets more interrogated as we go, as she's interrogating Maritza. So the episode interrogates her motivation. But this at least sets us up for her being in a position to carry the drama from here on.
Absolutely.
So yes, Kira says thank you to Cisco with tears still in her eyes and looks very resolved. She then enters the security office. Odo enters from the door to the cells, followed by Kairon, the drunken Bajoran from earlier, who says, "It's about time you let me out." Odo tells him to stay out of trouble. Kairon says he'll do his best. He says, "Oh, and Odo, let me know when you'll hang the Cardassian." And I've put in my notes that I feel at this point, Kairon's desires and Kira's are aligned. She believes Maritza to be guilty of committing
100%.
war crimes. Kairon only knows that he's a Cardassian, one of the people who tortured and kills Bajorans, but both of them wanting to face what they consider to be justice.
100%.
And that, yeah, I think the fact that we are strongly drawn to empathise with Kira throughout the episode. At this point, and a little earlier, we're drawn to empathise with Kairon, even though he's drunk. We don't know him. He's only angry. But again, I think that the audience being drawn to sympathise with him is a very strong playing piece in the way that the episode plays out, in the way that we respond emotionally to the story that's told.
100%. Again, I feel he is an audience stand-in, above and beyond, as you say, him just hating Cardassians, which is a thorny and problematic area, but also, yeah, it's like, well, we know more than you. We actually know this guy might be a war criminal of the first degree. He does deserve it. He deserves it. And then you start thinking, we're only a short way into the story. There's clearly more to come. And it leaves you guessing what you're thinking. Then you're thinking, my God, I'm thinking about just hanging a guy, in Star Trek.
And we haven't met him properly yet. We haven't heard the guy speak enough to know who he is as a person yet.
But we are painted as somebody who needs to be executed. Like 10 minutes into an episode of Star Trek, that is so counter to how I approach an episode where there's complexity and there are outright villains, but they're like ridiculous villains, like giant floating space heads who just want to eat the Earth because they think it's food. This kind of political complexity, this moral horrendousness is brand new. So
and the fact that it is an analogy. It is an analogy for the Holocaust, and that is written through this episode.
It's got such a painful real world resonance. So yeah, at this point I was really like emotionally like, because I saw this episode
to watch.
I've seen it before, but revisiting it again after many years is just, I was like, wow, God, I'd forgotten how complex this was. So anyway, please press us on, Kat. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, Kairon has just been freed by Odo. Odo then shakes his head and tells Kira that he's begun a background check on Maritza, and so far Maritza has told the truth. He boarded a freight from Kora 2, where he was an instructor at a military academy for 5 years. Kira tells Odo to keep looking. He says he intends to, and then Kira goes to Maritza in his cell.
Yes.
And just a note about the way that this next scene in the security cells is directed. It's very dialogue heavy. There's very little use made of props, and the dialogue is full of very heavy, important things. Most of the scene is therefore shot as a series of kind of quasi point of view shots over the shoulder of each character. So most of the time when we're looking at Maritza, it's from very close to Kira's head. And whenever we're looking at Kira, it's over Maritza's shoulder. The scene draws the audience to see each character from the other's point of view rather than having both on screen at once, which would give us more distance from them. And I think that all of the scenes between Maritza and Kira could have felt very staged. They could have looked like a play being put on if we were just watching the two of them. But this very dynamic and intimate way of shooting keeps us invested in both of the characters and keeps us trying to see them from each other's point of view rather than standing as a third party watching what's happening and judging them from there. It's just very cleverly done, I think.
I absolutely see where you're coming from. I'm just going to pop up again the picture we have of Kira coming in to see Maritza kind of sat in his cell and eating. And yeah, this is something we both enjoy investigating, is how episodes are shot. The cinematography of Deep Space Nine we find is often very rewarding and novel. And I absolutely see where you're coming from there. A shot from inside the cell out is incredibly evocative. It talks so much about the perspective of that person within that confined space. I think there are obvious allegories with things like Sounds of the Lambs,
Oh gosh, yes.
where there is a powerful villain figure within a cell who's clearly manipulating somebody outside of that cell. I mean, that's clearly an inspiration there.
Oh gosh, because Silence of the Lambs was, what was it, 92?
I will take your word for that. Off the top of my head, I cannot recall. But that's
1991, sorry. So very recent.
So there we go. So it'll be very fixed in people's memories. And it is an excellent way to portray the same sequence. It is essentially the same sequence. Trying to get information from a prisoner, and a prisoner trying to manipulate their interrogator. It's a very similar situation. And your talk about it appearing like a play is obviously very familiar because it is based on a play that was written by Robert Shaw previously. But what an episode of television can do is it can vary it more and give you these perspectives, as you say. Over Kira's shoulder, over Maritza's shoulder, is a wonderful way of, stepping out of that whilst retaining the most important element, which is claustrophobia, which is this is all happening, as you say, in the very dialogue-heavy interactions between these characters, in this very confined space, within a cell, within a security office, which is what this whole episode's about. It's about law, justice, consequences, actions, legality. So it works, and it, as you say, it doesn't get bogged down in positioning. And it's hard for, I think, especially a Star Trek show to do. Right back at the very beginning of the germ of this episode was, we need a bottle episode to offset, the location shooting and FX heavy other episodes in this season. We need something that just takes place on the sets we have. Can you do that? And so what they actually see as an obstacle, oh God, we've got to shoot only on the sets we have, as lovely as the DS9 sets are, actually becomes an asset to me. I think it's great in that it's shot in these very stark, horrible Cardassian designed sets. There's nothing else to do but dig on with the characters, with the dialogue.
Yes, and it touches on that theme that we keep coming back to with Deep Space Nine. There's no escaping. You're right, yes. I hadn't kind of picked up on to name the claustrophobia of all of these scenes set in the cell, but that is, it's absolutely the feeling. And it is part of, you're on Deep Space Nine, you can't just set off elsewhere. There's no one swooping in to save the day, and you can't leave at the end of it. We're here dealing with the issues at hand.
Yeah. That's a really good point, actually. I'd not thought of that as well. That's a great comparison, because TNG obviously ride up, Federation law, honour, justice, duty for all, save the day, and away. Whereas it's not. You're absolutely right, it's DS9, you're stuck here, and this situation is real. Bajor is right there. This history is right there. Kira is right here, dealing with it day after day. It's hard, and it's going to have to be done, and it's great. I love it. And it's hard. It is really hard. But yes,
the scene opens with a reference to a previous episode where it says, "My compliments on your replicators, Major, but the Semel stew could use a little yammock sauce," which is oddly placed, but I really enjoyed that. The reason there's no yammock sauce on the station is because Jake and Nog sold all of it a few episodes ago. So it's a beautiful little throwback to that.
And it's continuity, which we love in Deep Space Nine. We were just talking about how TNT, resets after every episode. DS9 doesn't. You're living in one closed space. The yammock sauce has been sold by a couple of kids. There's no more yammock sauce. You have to deal with that.
And it's a real bloody strength of this episode that they can have an actor wearing heavy
Yes.
Cardassian makeup,
Yes.
who delivers an incredible performance with great conviction, and which
incredible,
leaves
isn't
you
it?
feeling so many things before the end of the episode. They had so much faith in the script, the actors, the direction, that they dare throw in a reference to yamok sauce. They dare later on to have a scene with Quark that I might argue shouldn't necessarily be there. But they dare do it. They can do this within the confines of Star Trek and not be embarrassed that it's an episode of Star Trek.
Exactly. That, I think, speaks to the scope of the show, which is we can cover anything. We can tackle anything. Sci-fi does it surprisingly well. Doctor Who is a great example of being able to tackle any topic, any fictional setting, anything you want, and just, have it on a space station or a moon or a galaxy far away. Because it's still about propelling characters we can connect with through situations and storylines we relate to. And I think DS9 definitely goes the furthest with it in terms of exploring the complicated Star Trek universe in a way that is less, red shirts die, Klingons bad, Kirk saves the day. It's so much more than that, and this is such a great episode of it. And I love, yes, Harris Yulin, who plays Armin Maritza, emotes wonderfully through that horrifically constructive makeup. And he sets the tone, I think, for so many other Kardashian characters we will come to enjoy, such as Ducat or Garak, which, we obviously, just as an aside, we can't wait for his triumphant returns. But yeah, that's it. I absolutely see where you're coming from, and it is a wonderful scope of storytelling that exists within Star Trek, but really particularly within DS9 for me. And we must dig into this scene because it is the first we get the impression of Maritza as this incredibly unusual character. Please, your notes will be far better than mine.
I'm going to try and resist reading out the entirety of the script because it is incredibly good.
It's really
but
good.
They answer a bit about his dinner. Kira hopes he's enjoying it, and he says, "I doubt that, Major. I doubt that very much." She then counters that she wants to ask him a few questions and that she's going to continue asking them even if he won't answer because it's her job. And Maritza responds, "Persecuting Cardassians goes beyond your job, Major. It's your passion," which touches on the theme of Kira, and it will be named later in this scene, vengeance, what it is that motivates Kira in this situation. So Kira asks a few confirming questions, that he says he was not at Galatep and he doesn't have Kalanora, but their doctor says that he does, which means that he was there. And Kira says, if your lies are going to be made that transparent, this will be a short interrogation. So Maritza says, I'll try to make my lies more opaque in that case. Kira asks him what his rank and duties were at Galatep, and Maritza says, you don't want to know, you will be disappointed, in a sing-song voice. He goes on to explain that he had the distinction of serving in the exalted position of filing clerk. And actually, he would have preferred to avoid military service altogether, but he had the good fortune to be posted to the records office at Galatep. And, quote, I turned out to be an exemplary file clerk. In 14 units of service, I never misplaced or lost a record. I received numerous commendations. Goldar himself called my computer filing system a masterpiece of meticulous exactitude. And I enjoy, while watching these scenes, trying to work out the motivation of the character, the motivation of the actor, because we will find out later that he's playing a two-layered character. He is Maritza, who is pretending to be Goldar, who is pretending to be Maritza. The lies he tells have to be very subtle. He has to sell the idea that he wants to be read as a filing clerk, while he actually wants to be discovered as Goldar. So I think that at this point, Harris Yulin is trying to sell him as quite a subtle actor.
Yeah.
Being very proud of the filing clerk work that he did, which is actually partly true.
Yes.
It's something that may have taken pride in. He remembers a phrase that Goldar told him, when actually he also feels ashamed of the work that he did there. I wish I could sit Harris Yulin down and just ask him how he felt at stage of every scene that he's in here, because it's complex. You can read a lot into it, or you can see it as being extremely simple. He's just sitting here telling the truth because he wants to pass as someone who is trying to pass for a file clerk. But yes, he talks about this. Kira then looks at him and he says, "So now you know. My secret's out. My crime laid bare. I await execution." And we have a couple of pictures here. He has a small piece of cloth. It's either a towel or a napkin. And when he's saying, "I await execution," he holds it up playfully in front of his face as if he's under a shroud. And then in the next picture, he peeks over it as if playing a game with her. It's odd, and it's a very rare use of a prop in these scenes, which are very dialogue heavy and very prop light.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was an interesting way of showing a nonchalant side to a man who is potentially awaiting trial and execution.
I also thoroughly enjoyed this because it is the beginning of a really complex twirl of interactions between Maritza and Kira. And yeah, I've got that picture up now, and I mean, it is superb, and it is unlike, I think, anything I've ever seen in Star Trek. I think the closest you could come is when Q jumps between his mischief and his actual real, "I'm trying to teach you a lesson, Picard, pay attention." He alternates so swiftly between the mischievous and the harsh reality. And that's the closest it can get. And ultimately, I can never get away from the fact that, Q is ultimately all mischief. And your own, well held personal perspectives on Q as well. But it's a similar scenario, which is, there's something couched within something else. I'm telling you one thing, I'm meaning another. And as you say, within the meaning, there is another meaning. So this is very complex, and it comes at you so bizarrely with this interplay, where you are led to believe that actually the rug's been pulled out from you. And yes, Maritza was there in a totally non-participatory place. He was an admin officer. He was a secretary. He pushed paper around. He didn't kill or murder anyone. Although behind all of that is my initial question about what measure culpability in a system of horror like this. But it is, and it sets the tone so wonderfully for the character of Maritza, which is this bizarre combination of, jovial and a bit resigned and cynical, and he knows the system, and he's like, it almost paints Kira as, this vengeance obsessed zealot who just wants to persecute Cardassians, and you're thrown. You're like, oh my god, is Kira
this is a mild-mannered filing clerk. Why is she interrogating him?
Is that true? Is that the case? I mean, we already know that Odo has confirmed his identity as a filing clerk. So, oh my god, it really threw me the first time I saw it, because I was like, I don't understand, and this guy is such a complex character. He's not a villain. He's not a Star Trek villain with, that totally transparent, I will eat the galaxy. And we've kind of got the dual questions of whether he is culpable, whether he knows that he is culpable. Is he being so mild-mannered, so light about this because he does not perceive what he has done as being criminal? And that's a good question as well. Exactly. I
think the script very deliberately throws up all of these questions very quickly, and then very quickly takes twists and turns which carry on to other questions and other perspectives. I absolutely adore this episode. It's very well written, as you say, very complex.
Very complex. So a great first interview.
Maritza has just said, "I wait execution." Kira says, "I hope we won't keep you waiting long." She then shakes her head and stands and walks towards him. And the shooting script for the episode is actually very sparse on direction. There isn't much. Kira stands. There's nothing about Maritza with the piece of cloth, for example. So I'd love to know how much is the director making choices, the person who's determining what the camera angles will be, deciding where he wants the actors to be and what he wants to be in their hands at what moment, and how far is things that might have been improvised by the cast. Did they agree upon or talk through or just decide spontaneously some of these things they're doing? I'd love to know where these decisions lie, because it's such a subtle episode.
It is so, that whole sequence is so unusual. I think even within this episode, notwithstanding, but within Star Trek, it's such an unusual interaction with props that you don't see often in Star Trek, where everything is very carefully choreographed. It feels very natural and a little bit weird. So I would hope that that was improvised and everybody saw it as the brilliant, disconcerting move it is. I would hope so.
Yes, they then exchange a few lines about whether a filing clerk would actually teach at the military academy, as Maritza has, and whether Maritza is lying about this. Kira then says, I take it then you witnessed the atrocities. And the next line is delivered very quietly and with no emotion. Atrocities? What atrocities? Oh, I vaguely recall hearing a scream from time to time. Atrocities? No. And I'm impressed by the decision to say that line with very little emotion. The actor could have decided to look outraged or surprised or shocked. Atrocities in my labour camp? But instead, he's very quiet. He moves very little. The character Maritza is lying at this point. By the end of the episode, we know that not only did he hear screams constantly, but he was traumatized by them. And I think that the actor Harris Hewlett has chosen to show Maritza as being thoughtful and calculating and very careful at this moment. He isn't putting any emotion into it because his own emotions are so strong that he cannot betray them. He has to go, oh, atrocities? No. Pretending to be lightly confused. He doesn't know what she's talking about.
Or, and this was my reading, he is intentionally provoking Kira. That was my impression of Maritza in the first half of the episode is he is provoking every Bajoran.
Yes.
Because he wants this. He wants them to think he's Dahil, as we'll eventually find out. He wants them to be so blinded by the need for vengeance, as you pointed out, that they will absolutely go. He even doesn't. He denies that these atrocities took place, and then when he is found out to be, oh well, actually you knew they were because you're the architect of them, they will be even more incensed. They will see that he is trying to manipulate them. He's trying to weasel out of it. He is denying that any of it happened. He will so incense the Bajorans that they will rush to put him on trial, hold him up, and ultimately achieve all of the goals that he's laid from the very beginning. So it is the start.
Yeah, that absolutely fits with what he does throughout the episode. His constant trying to rile up Kira.
It is the beginning of his manipulation. As I said earlier, I feel like he is trying so hard to manipulate Kira, and as we know, he intentionally came to DS9. He intentionally found out about Kira. He's trying to stage manage this whole thing so he will be put on trial, and the Cardassian atrocities at Galatep will be exposed. And you only see it in hindsight, which I think is one of the masterclass strokes of this whole episode.
It's a wonderful episode to re-watch with the knowledge of everything that has happened in it from the beginning, trying to interrogate for yourself what Maritza is attempting to do.
I don't think there are many Star Trek episodes you can actually say that about, but this is one.
Speaking of which, it was actually at this point in the episode that I realised some of the parallels that this episode bears with a previous episode, which I very much did not enjoy. We've had a previous episode in this series where a character was ambiguous until near the end, where he might be lying, where he's being interrogated by a member of the crew who has a personal stake in that character's story. And that episode was Vortex, which is my least favourite so far, where Odo's interrogating a man who claims to know something about Odo's people. And in that episode, the ambiguity of the guest character's motives and the way that he acted that, it wound me up terribly. I felt that it was very badly done. But here the performance is so careful and subtle. And very importantly, the script means that all of that performance is leading up to a very significant, impressive, weighty reveal. In Vortex, when we find out that the guy was lying about knowing about Odo's people, it's in the middle of an action scene. They're escaping. They're trying to get to safety. It doesn't carry any weight at that point. And this episode is very different. It carries an analogy which Vortex absolutely didn't. Vortex doesn't have the underlying subtext that this one does. So in some ways, it's not fair to compare them. But at the same time, they know how to write an ambiguous lying character. They know how he can be acted. And they still wrote Vortex and kept it in anyway. It just frustrates me that you've got that same setup done first so badly and then so extremely well.
I would say that there could have been better work by the producers and the showrunners and the script editors to say, okay, we can impress a certain sense of continuity on this and have characters not act so differently, even guest characters, even different scripts. But I do think, again, it is a failing that episodic TV falls into, where the need to supply 18, 20 episodes a season, constantly filming back to back, being written back to back, it does mean that there are going to be episodes where it just falls apart because it was written by people who just don't know the medium or don't know the characters. And I take every point you make about Vortex compared to this. Yeah, I think you make a very, very sadly valid point. What a shame.
But yes, the conversation continues, and Kira asks,
Yeah.
"Do you expect me to believe you knew nothing of the murders, the tortures? You never saw the bodies?" And Maritza, again, very calmly and quickly says, "Of course I saw the bodies. People died all the time at Galatep. Mining accidents, illnesses, feuds among the workers." And Kira responds, "You're saying Bajorans killed each other?" And Maritza says, "At times, over food, a blanket, a woman. The conditions were harsh. It was a labour camp, Major." And at that point, I might be reading too much into it, but just at that point in the scene, Harris Hewlin's eyes are very shiny. And I don't know whether the makeup was irritating him, which apparently the makeup was a problem for him. I think there was an interview with Armin Shimmerman, which I'll try and cite later in this episode, where he says that Harris Hewlin was struggling to remember his lines because the makeup was he was just struggling to act in it. He couldn't recall things because he was so distracted by the feeling of this heavy makeup, which you cannot tell while watching it.
No.
It's beautifully acted by him.
That is a testament to the professionalism of the man. Because, yeah, I can imagine that must have been a horrible obstacle, but yes.
Oh, gosh, yes. But at this moment, just while watching it and while being myself struck by the emotion of, we know that people were murdered there and he is just outright denying it. I wondered whether the actor was feeling something in response to having to act that, whether the character is feeling something in response to pretending he doesn't care about that. We can't know, and it's possible that Harris Hewlin himself wouldn't remember if we were to ask him.
I think so.
But yeah, he looks as if he's holding back strong emotion at that moment, which I think works for every level of the character.
I think that is a completely valid interpretation because of what we will later come to learn about the character and his reaction to the events. It's totally believable, and it doesn't detract or skew the episode in any way, so I don't think there's any problem in reading into that reaction. Definitely. I hadn't noticed that. Again, we must sadly deal with the fact that DS9 was shot in a different manner to contemporary high-definition television, so we lose some of the detail in it, sadly. But yes.
And I'm going to go into a bit of the script, which again, I'm going to repeat this verbatim because I think it was very impactful in the episode. Kira says, "I helped liberate that camp. I saw the bodies. I know how they died." And then Maritza says very quickly and decidedly, "You saw what we wanted you to see. Who do you think started the rumours about brutality at Galatep? It was Guldarhiel himself." And with a lot of emotion, he says, "Now there was a leader. Brilliant, extraordinary man. He knew that to rule by fear was to rule completely. Why bother with actual mass murders when just the reports of such incidents would have the same effect?" And that little speech very closely resembles what Holocaust deniers will say about Nazi concentration camps. It makes a lot of sense for the character to say it, whether because he's winding up Kira, whether because he wants to convince her that he is Guldarhiel, who he's praising so strongly, whether he just wants to make her angry because he's once again denying what happened.
But I think all good interpretations.
But I think that the writers must have had an incredibly strong faith in what they'd written in order to include it, because the last thing you would want would be for anyone to come away feeling that, taking that message on board, that it was made up, or feeling as if it had been spoken of too lightly, that it had been, that effectively fun was being made of it because it's spoken by someone wearing heavy alien makeup. It's a very emotionally loaded and effective and risky thing to have included the denial of the atrocities at Galatep. And I think the writers really believed that this script would work in order to risk including that here.
I had not even made that connection myself, but I think there is incredible merit in what you say, that yes, that denial is sadly something we struggle with to this day in the face of horrendous, overwhelming evidence. And well, this is it. We've both, separately, when we prepared this episode, discussed about how close we tread to real world events, and this is skirting as close as we want to get. Because ultimately this is a escapist TV show, and we don't want to comment on real world events in which we are not qualified to comment and aren't part of the scope of this series.
Absolutely, but this episode particularly does draw on
us in that direction, exactly, and it deserves to be discussed as professionally as as we can manage, being podcast hosts. But that is not something I'd actually made the connection on, and you're absolutely right. I think it's all of the points you made plus that, and as you say, it's an incredibly fine line to read, to tread for viewers of, again, as much as I love it, an episodic sci-fi TV show. You're right, with people being able to dismiss it because of heavy makeup and janky special effects, and it all takes place somewhere else. Deep Space Nine, as I hope you will come to learn, is the best at holding up that mirror so closely to us and saying, this is the reality. This is, I would actually say it's hard to believe it's 300 years in the future and supposedly the utopia of Kirk and Picard, because it feels painfully closer to 20th century Earth with these kind of horrendous situations that are so easy to relate to. It's incredible. It really is incredible. And to do this in season 1 as well, when you're not sure.
No, right? They haven't waited to find their feet and said, right, we'll save the very heavy stuff till everything's well established, so we know we're going to get further series.
Exactly.
No, they go straight into it here. It's
a hell of a gamble.
It's bold.
And I'll remind viewers as well, Kat has not seen the latest series of Deep Space Nine. This whole podcast is around the fact that they are watching it for the first time and have no idea what's to come. So obviously, please, keep your spoilers to a minimum. Yeah, God.
But yes, the conversation continues. He's just said that inventing mass murders had the same effect. Kira asks what that effect was, and Maritza responds, as well as I do, Major, to keep you Bajorans thinking of yourselves as victims, to keep you afraid and helpless. And she retorts, turns out we weren't so helpless, we did get rid of you, which he says was a political decision, Major. And he says, I've enjoyed reminiscing with you, but now it's time you let me out of here. So they wrangle for a little while. Kira says she can't do that. He says, oh, no, of course not. No, you see, you're the one who's lying now, Major. It's not the truth you're interested in. All you want is vengeance. And in the shooting script, it says, as smiling, he knows he's gotten to her. And he smiles horribly at her in that moment as we fade to black. And that's the first naming of Kira's vengeance as a motivator in this episode. Which, I think they do well to cover as much emotional ground as they do in the 45 minutes. We're interrogating whether or not this man is culpable, what it means for him to have been there, whether he was committing atrocities or not as a Cardassian, and also what Kira's role is in trying to bring him to justice, what her emotional landscape looks like during that search, and whether there's anything she needs to look at within herself in that process. It's a lot. It's so much to hold.
It's taken me a while, and a lot of my thoughts coalesce when we're having these conversations, which is why I thoroughly enjoy doing this. But I did wonder, actually, because he says that to her, and I think at any other time that would have provoked her even more, and she would have been furious to think that she was being manipulated like that. Right now, though, Kira, with her prolonged exposure to Starfleet and their pesky, abstract approach to things, is actually thinking, am I actually so manipulated? Am I so victim to my vengeance that I will just do this? And it actually provokes the opposite of what Maritza wants. She's now more interested in than ever than finding proof, justifying that Maritza was there, that he was involved, that he deserves to be punished for Galatep. And it actually ends up undoing it. Because
you're right. Yes,
pops into my mind.
I think you're right. In many contexts, she would have taken that and just been more angry, more unreasonable,
more willing.
Fast-tracked is going to Bajor. But yes, instead she becomes more intent on finding, no, actually, what is the truth? What is happening here? I've got to know that he is culpable, and it isn't just my desire for vengeance that's driving this. Yes.
That had not occurred to me through my notes or anything. It's literally through the discussion with you. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you, Tim, for noticing and raising that.
That's why we do this. That's why we do this podcast, and why you, our lovely viewers, are here with us watching this. So we're very grateful. But yeah, mad, isn't it? Mad, isn't it? The complexities of this episode peel away. I hate to say it, like layers of an onion. It just keeps going down another layer, and it's more complex.
I can only imagine how long they spent refining this script, because it works so well throughout. It does so much with so little. But yes, we must crack on, because we've got at least half the episode still to go, and it's 9:30.
Thank you, Kat.
So we next see exterior Deep Space Nine from below, and we cut to Sisko at a comm screen in his office, where Goldie Cat is questioning why a Cardassian citizen has been detained, when he had understood that the Federation guaranteed safe and unrestricted passage to all travellers visiting the station. Sisko tells him that Maritza came here seeking medical attention. Right now, he's under our doctor's care. All we're trying to do is verify his identity. A simple matter, if he'll give us some assistance. And I just noted here a very strange little. I don't think it's a continuity error. It's a decision that was made. We've got a picture where we see Ducat on the comm screen over Sisko's shoulder.
There it is.
And we see him from head down to just below his shoulders, full kind of top of his torso view. And then in the next time we see him, we've got a close view of only his face and his neck and the very tops of his shoulders. And what they've chosen to do here, I think, is that in the wider shot where we see the comm screen over Sisko's shoulder, they want us to know what race it is that we're communicating with. And I think that his profile with the strong shoulders, a little bit like the Romulans, but it tells you you're dealing with a Cardassian. The shape of the head, the shoulders, the darkness of the uniform tells us that this is a Cardassian, this is Goldie Cat. But they also want to capture Mark Alamo's response to what is being said in the scene. So instead of holding him there, the next shot has his face very close in, so that we can see him acting through makeup. So it struck me as odd that Ducat's own camera has zoomed in on him during a comm screen conversation. But I think that was a subtle, deliberate choice made for the quick recognition, and then the subtlety of seeing that when Gold Ducat is speaking, he either is or isn't lying, and we can read that through his face.
You know, I hadn't clicked on any of that, and you're absolutely right.
I might be talking out of my ass, that you might just have accidentally done two completely different shots. But I felt that would be a good excuse or a good reason for having done that.
Yeah, because I think definitely it's another Star Trek trope, which is a screen with an upper torso and head of an alien. I mean, we saw it. I'll just quickly cut back to the Koblerian captain.
Oh, yes.
That is a standard Star Trek view of somebody on a set. You know, we can see their alien face, and then
we can see whether they're wearing Federation uniform or not.
Exactly. And they've always got like two arms and a torso, because this is Star Trek, and everyone's a variation on two-legged biped.
Because of the progenitors, Tim. Because they're all descended from the same people.
Fine, okay, whatever. But you're absolutely right. It never clocked to me that they actually do zoom in now. You won't have this context, and I don't think it breaks any spoilers in saying that the Ducat, who we've now seen a couple of times, is the kind of vain egotist who would actually have his zoom set up to literally enlarge his shot.
Okay, you've enjoyed my body. Here is my face.
Let me make this point very clear, Benjamin. I'm right here now. You can see nothing but my face. So actually, it fits in universe that Ducat would absolutely have it zoom in on him. But I think in a narrative sense, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Kat, that it very much actually lets Mark Alamo emote Ducat's reactions. And as you will come to know and loathe, he is very emotive, very reactive in his face. So
I'm looking forward to some more of him, because there hasn't been much Gold Ducat so far. He was in a couple of the early episodes, but just to set him up as the previous person aboard the station, an enemy. We don't know much about him yet, so I'm looking forward to seeing more of him.
Can chat make a note that Kat asked to see more of Ducat? And I was saying, no more on the matter.
I'm going to regret that, aren't I?
I'm just saying. They absolutely landed on a winner with Gold Ducat, but we will see how this develops. Okay, we will say no more. My notes say, oh no, it's everybody's favourite Smarmosaur, which I am claiming that as my own creation of the lizard, smarmy lizard, Smarmosaur. And Ducat he's great. He's great in this scene. He's clearly been positioned by the Cardassian government to be the most antagonistic person to Ben Sisko, his counterpart, his replacement on DS9, formerly Tarok Nor. And it's the usual hedged diplomatic interplay of, one of our citizens is being held. I certainly hope the Federation does not. And it's all those veiled threats and just scene-chewing horror that is really good. And
Scene chewing is the right term for it, and in this episode particularly, he strikes a really good balance with Maritza. You've got two Cardassian characters, one of them very ambiguous at the moment. He's smug. We know that he's trying to make Kira angry, but we don't know exactly what his deal is yet. And Gul Dukat, he can just be a camp villain, and he is. He's brilliant. I really enjoy him in this.
Kat described Ducat as a camp villain. I want that on the record because it will be so good to see how that plays out. But yes, I absolutely see that it was intentional. We're meant to both see the parallels, that smug superiority, the arrogance, the constant monologuing of Cardassians, and then the contrasts. You know, Ducat is very evasive and hides things. Maritza is evasive and hides things, but there's more to it. You know, Ducat is just out and out arrogant and condescending. Maritza is not. He's manipulative, sly, subversive. There is a difference between them. So it's very intentional. I'm going to let you press on because I've got a few more notes in this scene, but I want to wait until you get there as well. So please, Kat, do take us forward.
Certainly. I'm going to skip forward a little bit. They have a bit of an argy-bargy about whether they charged him with anything, whether they're going to keep him. And then Ducat says, I do appreciate the awkwardness of your position here, Commander. This Bajoran obsession with alleged Cardassian, and he pauses, improprieties during the occupation is really quite distasteful, which Sisko counters with, I suppose if you're Bajoran, so was the occupation. And Ducat says, I might remind you that neither one of us is Bajoran, and I would hate their bitterness to cause conflict between Cardassia and the Federation. So, as you say, veiled threats, not wanting to cause a diplomatic incident here between the Federation and Cardassia, but also Ducat is casting aspersions about all Bajorans based on their race alone, which is an expression of the attitude that the episode ultimately cautions us against having towards Cardassians based on their race alone. It's absolutely what we'd expect from Ducat, but I think it's also a nice way of drawing out that theme into the wider world. It's not just whether Kira hates all Cardassians or whether Maritza hates all Bajorans. That dynamic plays out on Terok Nor previous to this. With Gul Dukat and the wider world, he is happy to say as much to a Federation member. I like that those lines of dialogue just make that live more in the world, that theme is widespread. It's not just two people aboard the station, it's about the wider world outside. It's just very nicely done.
It is wonderful. I also immediately bumped on improprieties because in fact it ties into what you said earlier, which is this kind of horrible, nebulous, vague world of, well, was the Holocaust over-reported? Was it not as bad as they say? It is an effort by the Cardassian state, of which Ducat is a fully recognised member, to diminish the experiences that we believe wholeheartedly Kira is reporting with truthfulness. It's horrendous. It's grotesque.
It's projecting blame onto the Bajorans by saying they have overplayed this.
Exactly. And it comes with its own inveigled threat, which is, oh, well, listen, Cardassia and Federation were both relative superpowers. You know, we don't want this in what, I guess, by lack of any other comparison, is a third world. In the context of the old Cold War terminology, which was the third world was a nation that was not aligned with either the Soviet Union or the United States. Bajor is not currently aligned with either Cardassia or the Federation. Yes, there was a Starfleet crew on the station, but Bajor right now is independent, and therefore Ducat can use that as a card to threaten Sisko, the nearest Federation representative, to say, we don't want this to become an issue between us. We are galactic neighbours on a much bigger scale than Bajor, and we don't want this to become an issue between our governments, our peoples. Do not cause a diplomatic incident that could trigger a war. There is a massive, wider context here that Sisko has to be so cognizant of that I think was missing in TNG, was missing a fair bit in the original series, although they occasionally played with people who lived near the Klingon Empire or the Romulan Empire. And in doing so, I think it's wonderful that it sets up Sisko to deliver that just incredible rejoinder, which was, well, I'm sure the occupation was seen as a bit of an impropriety by the Bajorans. And it's just like, it's so...
And it delivers it so lightly in tone.
And yet it's just so... Oh, there was so much that
it does. It's very cat and mouse. It's those two characters playing with each other, toying at diplomacy.
It is that fine detail that I think is good writing. It's good TV. It's not even good Star Trek writing. It's good TV
It
writing.
is.
You know, I thoroughly enjoyed this scene. Yes,
This is what I think. One more thing from this scene that I want to highlight before we move ahead, and it's that Ducat says that Cisco doesn't need his help to safeguard one Cardassian citizen on Cisco's station. If any of these Bajoran hate-mongers get their hands on him, I'll hold you personally responsible. And I felt that coming at this point, the line might be hinting at the idea that Kira might herself become violent towards Maritza. We've seen that he is riling her, that she is increasingly angry with him. She's the one who has a lot of interaction with him aboard the station. And Kayron isn't in the cell anymore. Kayron's disappeared as far as the audience is concerned. So it both foreshadows what actually happens at the end of the episode, and I think plants the seed of the idea that maybe Kira herself might be a danger to Maritza. I think whichever it's intended to do, or both, it's a very well-placed line. It hammers home the idea of Bajoran hate mongers, painting the people who have survived the Cardassian occupation as the ones who are now sowing hatred, the ones who are being violent.
We're not going to go near any contemporary politics, but this idea of a cycle of hatred and atrocities justifying atrocities, I think, would find resonance with audiences in 1993 and in 2002.
Yes.
You know, that is very much there. And again, it plays into this context of not only do you have this one situation to resolve, but if you handle it wrong, Ben Sisko, you will trigger a war that could kill millions. You know? So
you're right, it brings the full weight of the situation, not only for Kira as an individual, but yes, for the Federation, for Bajor.
Exactly. Bajor will be on the front line of a renewed Cardassian offensive. It's a horrendous concept for anybody to have to deal with. My only complaint, therefore, is that we don't have how the hell they deal with this. As a result, I think it's sort of resolved as the episode goes along that, you know, actually Caldecott would rather not investigate the situation once the facts begin to come out. Anyway, I think I've answered my own question there when I realised that there's no way Ducat would want to revisit this situation. So, yes, wonderful. But a great scene, and a wonderful return from Mark Alema, who is rapidly becoming our friendly neighbourhood villain.
I'm looking back at the chat and seeing comments along the lines of "Cat wants more Ducat, yay!" Oh, and someone's quoted me, "Ducat is brilliant." I'm going to eat these words later, aren't I?
I think Star Trek Deep Space Nine is very good at giving you really complex villains you really, really just treasure for what they are. But
I've only seen season 1. Whatever he does later, I don't know about it yet.
Exactly. No spoilers, chat. Leave Cat peace. So please
leave me alone. But yes, we then cut to Kira on the promenade, looking out of a window at the stars, and Dax joins her. I haven't detailed the entirety of this conversation, but it covers Kira wanting Maritza to be guilty of more than being a file clerk. She believes that Bajor will feel some satisfaction in Maritza's punishment, and Dax gently advises Kira that if she punishes him without reason, it won't mean anything. And Kira already knows that vengeance isn't enough. It's a very short scene, but it's useful both for drawing out of Kira the confession that she wants to punish Maritza and she wants to be guilty. You're right, Tim. His naming vengeance to her has caused her to go away and think about this more and to contemplate whether she wants that to be her motivation. And the scene also gives Kira the perspective of a wise older colleague who reflects that Kira is not being fully committed to the truth, but again is seeking vengeance. It's a short scene. The performances feel very authentic from both of them. But we need to move on because we have many miles to go before we sleep.
I'll just say as well, Dax, perfect play. It could have been Sisko handing on this sage wisdom, but no, it's Dax with her 7 lives. And can I just say as well, it's wonderful to see a female character giving solid advice to a female character.
Yes, and from the beginning of this episode where we saw them chatting together, it's a friendly relationship. It's advice from a friend, not from someone who is pulling rank on her or advising her that it would be undiplomatic. She's giving her advice person to person, and it's lovely.
Thank you.
We then cut to an exterior of Deep Space Nine, and then to Miles and Neela, who is a named Bajoran engineering apprentice in Ops. And we've got a picture of the massive number of illuminated panels that are in view at the start of this scene. I really like this scene. It takes us away from the action just between Kira and Maritza. It gives us a bit of a break from that very intense conversation between them. But it's also a lovely scene in itself. O'Brien tells Neela to reroute the signal enhancement module to the main sensor array, which is both lovely technobabble, and he's telling her to send a piece of software to Dax's station where she is about to walk up and use it. It's functional. It binds the scene together.
It actually makes sense rather than just being rerouted through the navigational deflector and reverse the
You're
polarity.
not just changing you're not just reversing the polarity here. You're actually doing something that matters. Not just invoking subspace. I really like that in this scene, Neela has a bun hairstyle rather than the very short cut. The last scene I noted that Kira and a male Bajoran member of staff both had the same short cropped cut.
Yes.
I suspect that in this instance it's just because the extra wanted to keep her hair long.
Yes.
And they let her do it. But I do like that there's a little bit more variety in how Bajorans can present. I like it in Star Trek when they're not just, when no species is shown as just a monotone. They all wear the same thing. They all style themselves the same.
The plant of hats, as TV Tropes puts it, yes. No, it's a great scene. And we talked when we were setting this up and picking the pictures that it's a wonderful shot of the ops set, which we love, and is wonderfully detailed, really realised in that wonderful detailed manner that the Star Trek production crew do so well. And again, a solid reminder that this is not a Federation facility. None of this looks like the Enterprise.
Particularly in these circular designs. That's a very Cardassian trait for the displays to have. It's lovely that they've used presumably the same technology to create these screens, but they've made them look sufficiently different. Yes. They're usable by Federation staff, but they're designed by Cardassians. Yes. Yeah, it's really nice. Gorgeous. But yes, we then have a beautiful long cut. Odo and Sisko are walking, and the next few interactions take place during a scene where the camera roves around. It follows the actors up and down stairs. They join with, I think, Miles and Neela, one of whom walks behind Kira to go up to where Dax is sitting. And we get 5 different speaking characters over the course of one long, unbroken shot. It must have been absolute hell to choreograph because everyone has to be at their mark at the right place and saying their right lines of technobabble while not standing in front of anyone else, and there are extras wandering around in the background. And I love it. It could have been a really difficult scene of several people saying different things. We're sending a piece of software over there. I need to look at this picture. We're going to zoom. And instead it's all tied together by this one shot that follows characters around as they pass information between each other. It's so elegant, and it didn't have to be. I love the effort that went into it.
Again, this speaks to what we love so much about DS9, which is good cinematography, good use of the sets, good use of the actors.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Another show I absolutely adore is The West Wing, which pioneered this thought of
long corridors and people walking down them.
Complex conversation, difficult language that you don't completely follow, And this took place years before, I can't even remember when The West Wing started, but it was late on, a few years after DS9 started, and
yes, 1999.
There we go. I knew it was a bit after DS9, because DS9 started in '93, and this is it. This is them doing that with less technology on a more complex set, because at least in the West Wing everything was on one level and it was just corridors and offices.
But people were holding props and wearing weird makeups, and
you've got stairs, you've got a screen you need to separately animate with a separate video feed. I mean, they were just pushing the limits of the technology of the day, and I'm so happy to see it. And for such a minor scene, it does what I love best about DS9, which it world builds. It makes me believe it's really there. And these people are really just trying to get on with their jobs in a real space of ops. Kudos to everyone involved. Thoroughly enjoyed it. But with such peons out of the way, please, Kat, take us to the point of this scene.
Right, Odo has checked the Bajoran archives and seen that they do have Maritza on record as a filing clerk at Galatep. He's also checked with the military academy on Korra too. Maritza has been teaching there, just as he claims. Sisko then asks Major how many images were sent from the Bajoran archives, and there is only one from Galatep that has Maritza in it. O'Brien and Dax then cross behind them. The camera follows Dax. O'Brien tells her the image enhancement and transformation functions are patched directly into your console. The shot finally cuts there, and we get a close shot on Sisko and Kira. And Sisko asks Major, what if this image confirms that Maritza was a file clerk? What do you expect us to do then? Kira, rather strange, says, I suppose you'll let him go. And Sisko says, I'm glad we understand one another. It introduces a moment of tension between the two, which keeps the audience engaged with the emotion of the scene, and it gives context to their looking at the photo of Maritza. There are consequences that hang on their identifying him.
And there's continuity, that this is a reminder of that ongoing clash between Sisko's authority and Kira's kind of, I don't know, a sense of need to follow Bajoran interests. It's good. It's a reminder. It's good world building again. It happens in a couple of lines. Love it. Top marks.
Yes. So Dax now gets the photograph up on screen. Sisko asks which one is Maritza, and Dax says, let's see. According to the caption, he's the one in the background in the far right. I did pick up on the phrase the far right, and I don't know how deliberate it was. It might just be a way of describing who's in a photograph.
Sure it was. I hope it was.
Into it. But yes, Sisko then says, isolate and magnify. And Dax says, give me a minute, I'm running an image enhancement sequence.
Let me bring that up, please.
But they bring up a picture of him, and where she's zoomed in, it's still fuzzy. You can't see whose face it is, because that's not how technology works. They're lampshading every scene in television where they've gone, enhance, and you can magically see in a Blade Runner where you can see right down to the pixel what someone's face looks like in a scene shot at night. They lampshade that. Frickin' Sisko turns to Dax and says, you'll have to do better than that.
And then because
they included that, she uses the software that O'Brien and Neela have just sent her to actually enhance it. And they've got the technology, but it's several stages. It's not as simple as enhance. Ooh, it's him. I bloody love it. It's beautiful. It was a lovely thing to think to include here.
Yes,
and again, in Deep Space Nine, they so often think about the practicalities of what they're asking the characters to do. The technology is effectively space magic, but it has internal logic. Oh, I love it so much. But yes, importantly, as you can now see, if you're watching rather than listening to this, when they bring up Maritza's face, it's not the face of the man that they have captive in the cell. It is somebody else. So Sisko then checks with Dax if we're definitely looking at the right man. Dax confirms that that's Eamon Maritza in the background on the far right. Yes. And Sisko pauses for a few moments, then asks Dax to isolate the images of another Cardassian in the scene, looking at the one in profile on the left. And here the photo does do the impossible thing of zooming in and having one person move out of the way so that you can see the person that was behind them.
They never even dwell on it. They're just like, yeah, we will just move this photo forwards in time. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, how are you doing this? You have one image. How are you extrapolating this?
To be generous, we could say that photographs taken that far in the future contain the data from a number of milliseconds before and after the shot was taken, precisely so that you can move elements in the scene. That, or they have an advanced AI that can fill in the details.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a bit of a shame that they lampshade a common trope and then they use a very Star Trek trope, zooming in and having people move around. But anyway, the face that they zoom in on is familiar. It's the face of the Cardassian that's held in the cell, but Dax says that the caption has that person as Goldar Heel. And Kira's expression here is interesting. She isn't smiling with victory, but I think she looks very resolute. It isn't entirely clear what she's thinking.
Yeah.
She looks quite intense, but she's not making her feelings about it known just yet.
I think you could read into that what you wanted, and it is the mark of a complex character who has been confronted with astounding information. She thought she had her hands on somebody who was at Galatep. She did not at all think she had the commandant of the whole camp, the architect of all of its nightmares. He obtained an epithet. He is the butcher of Galatep, and she has him in her hands. I mean, it's astonishing. So I think you can read into Kira's expression any number of things, and it is a testament to Nana that she lets you read whatever you want into that expression, but it's definitely resolution. You're absolutely right.
And it's testament to the script that when this happens, It progresses well as part of the story. It doesn't feel like a cheat. The fact they've looked to the face of Maritza, they've looked to the face of someone else. They've made this. It feels like it fits. It works well within the world. They've gone through the steps of the investigation. It's actually happening incredibly quickly that this turnaround has occurred, but it doesn't feel as if they cheated and gone, oh no, he's got the face of Goldar Hill. It's Goldar Hill. Got it. It feels natural, even though it's incredibly compressed. It's just, yeah, it's very nicely scripted.
It moves quickly, but it feels like all of this is happening at the right time. You're absolutely right. It doesn't feel too pressured. It doesn't feel strung out. It feels just...
And it feels as if the characters have time to respond. We do have lingering moments of looking at people's facial expressions. We're not just swept along with it. So I've tried to condense this next scene and pass commentary on it rather than just reading the script. But as throughout the rest of this episode, the dialogue is really striking, so I've kept some of it in here.
Yeah, please do.
Kira enters the cell area. Maritza opens with, "Let me guess, you've come back to learn the secret of my filing system." At this point, he's a condemned man, as far as he's concerned, but he's making a joke completely deadpan. Maritza knows that Kira must have looked up images of him and Goldar Hill. I think Maritza knows what's going on here. Kira asks if I'm going to keep referring to the character as Maritza.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I would.
Yeah. Kira is trying to understand whether he is Goldar Hill or not. She asks if he killed the real Maritza so that he could take his place. And she says, well, you'll pay for that death and all the others you're responsible for. And Maritza says, oh, I don't think I could pay for all of them, Major. There were so many and you could only execute me once. Which is just an amazing line.
Yeah.
It's one part of the scene where Maritza looks and acts very smugly. And I might be reading too much into it, but I think that part of what's going through Maritza's head is that he can relax. He's been trying to play Goldar Hill, playing Maritza. At this point, she thinks he's Goldar Hill. The mask can be dropped.
Perfect.
All he's got to do now is act as Darhiel. He can relax into playing the villain. He doesn't have to be subtle anymore.
100%.
He can stop pretending to be proud of his filing system, and he can just play the villain. He doesn't have to put as many layers on during this part. And I think that is part of the characterization here.
Oh, yeah.
Kira refers to Darhiel for the first time as the Butcher of Galatep, as you mentioned, Tim, which I think is likely to be a reference to Nikolaus Barbie, the real-world Butcher of Leon, who tortured prisoners as the head of the Gestapo.
Indeed.
Maritza strolls across his cell. Again, he's holding a piece of cloth, and he says, tell me, Major. And he goes to Kira with, did you find this all out by yourself, or did you have help from your Federation masters? Maritza wants Kira to be enraged with him. He knows that he's succeeded in persuading her as to who he is, and he wants her to remain angry and press forward with the trial.
Precisely.
But of course, from the viewer's perspective on a first watch, it just looks as if Darhiel is gloating. We don't know that he's a man who wants to go to trial. This just looks like an absolute villain enjoying his villainy.
Yeah.
It's only on a second watch that subtlety comes through. Kira responds that he can spend his time wondering about whether she figured it out by herself while they prepare his war crimes tribunal. And Maritza responds, well, there was no war. Kira likes to indulge some pathetic fantasy about brave Bajoran soldiers marching to honorable defeat. But in reality, Bajor just surrendered. And Kira replies, visibly angry, the Bajorans were a peaceful people before you came. We offered no threat to you. We could never understand why you had to be so brutal. She then says that she's heard enough of his lies, and Maritza responds with a speech about wanting to tell her that he was Goldar Hill, proud of his achievements, and it ends with, Maritza was a magnificent file clerk, and I, Goldar Hill, I hope you won't think it immodest in me to say so, but I was a magnificent leader. Oh, you never saw Galatep at its height. For a labour camp, it was the very model of order and efficiency. And why? For that, you have to look to the top, to me! He's very villainous, and there is something horribly real about the pride that he takes in it. At this moment, you could well believe that the character believes he was on the right side, that awful phrase, doing what had to be done, and doing a very good job of it. And I suspect, although I'm not a historical scholar, I haven't read any of the Nuremberg trial transcripts, I haven't looked into it, but I suspect that some of his attitude and some of what he says here mirrors some of what has been said by high-ranking Nazi officials in the aftermath of the war, taking pride in the work that they did. Yes, he goes on to say, I did what had to be done. My men understood that, and that's why they loved me. I would order them to go out, and this bit is very emotive. and kill Bajoran scum, and they'd do it. They'd murder them, and they'd come back covered in blood, but they felt clean. Now, why did they feel that way, Major? Because they were clean. And these lines are absolutely revolting. The enthusiasm with which they're spoken, the actor commits to them completely, and it absolutely sells the idea that this man is pure, banal, realistic evil. He completely depersonalizes the Bajorans he's murdered, and it goes so far beyond what we see in Ducat. It's far beyond the cackling villain twirling his moustache. It isn't camp. It isn't played for humor. It's horribly real. And it's just horribly effective. The meeting of the lines and the way that they're delivered. I had to pause this scene several times while writing notes on it because I was very, very struck by it.
Yeah, 100%. I actually didn't take too many notes on this because I was just so kind of taken aback by it. All I've noticed is that he had a bizarre, almost manic pride in camp operations and in his power and leadership of men. And for me, my only interpretation is that this is Maritza projecting to us a version of Darheil that he served under, warped through his own trauma. You know, here was a man broken by the experiences he was involved or saw or whatever. And in him, I can almost imagine that this is how Armin Maritza sees Darheil, this towering, gloating tyrant, relishing in the horror he inflicted. And it kind of makes sense to Maritza, who is clearly a very timid and inward-looking man, to see this kind of, as you say, just overt villainy in such a horrible concept.
You're right, I hadn't thought of it from that perspective, that the portrayal of Darheil is through the eyes of someone who was frightened by him. And who saw him.
It's never said in the episode, but he is. He's clearly... Well, you couldn't not be. You couldn't be somebody who was so affected by what happened at Galatep and not think the man who did this is an ogre of nightmarish proportions, you know. I think there's no way you can see it. And in doing so, I'm reflecting on this and thinking that Maritza was clearly victimized by this. And it's bizarre. It's this almost bizarre contrast between... He was a Cardassian official. He should have been in ultimate power. And yet he, not as victimized. No way does it compare. But in his own way, he was tortured and horribly abused by the system he was a part of.
Yeah.
God, I hadn't thought of that. Isn't it bizarre how we come back and discuss these episodes and we see things in them that we didn't see initially? So, yeah. It is a testament to Harris Yulin. He was able to portray one person, portraying another person through a lens of horror that warped that ultimate, the Darheil that we never see. We never know the real Darheil. He's dead. He's long dead. And yet we only see this version of him that Maritza presents. Oh, God, that's complex.
Yes. And it's in an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Wild, right? Wild.
Yes, Maritza goes on somewhat. Kira then says, "You admit your atrocities," and he grandstands further, admitting everything, boasting of his accomplishments, and then he insults Kira. He says, "You and that little Shakar resistance cell that you belong to, all you did was annoy Cardassians while I was out exterminating Bajorans." And I'm not going to go into what Shakar means, because when I googled it, I was immediately spoiled for a future episode. It turns out that
yes, of course you would.
Yeah, the Shakar come up in the future as well. Here we only know that it's a resistance cell that Kira was a part of. Kira tells him to tell that to his tribunal, who'll sentence him to death. Maritza responds that he will, but that won't change anything. You've already lost, Major. You can never undo what I've accomplished. The dead will still be dead. He's still trying to keep her angry, and it is working.
It's working.
Kira walks away from him. We get a view of him in his cell in wide shot, and then zooming in on his face as he asks, "What will you do now, Major? Withhold my medicine?" Which was a useful reminder that he is here, he is ill. He's come here with Kalanora, which hasn't been a focus of the plot for some time now. No. And we fade to black.
Doesn't he? I'll just because I made a note of it in my notes. The line, "You can kill me, torture me. What will it do? It can't undo what I have accomplished." And that left me absolutely frozen. I've put in my notes just this is absolutely crazed horror. And again, at the time I thought he was just playing up Maritza as a pantomime villain, trying to provoke Kira so she will immediately ship him to Bedroth trial, where he will get no fairer trial because all he'll do is do the same. But it's more than that, isn't it? It is the reaction of a man utterly brutalized, and reacting with visceral horror and subconscious terror to a situation he was not in any control of and utterly a victim of. I'm not apologizing for Maritza. And the
No,
concept
absolutely. I
of
was just going to say that I'm very impressed by the subtlety with which the script is written, and
precisely
that they managed to
this is how
have a
people
Cardassian posting of what happened at Galateb, but
yes.
portrayed by a character
Hmm.
who hated the fact that it happened. I think it's just the different ways that you can read into the episode are so well thought out by the script and by the differing levels of trauma of victimhood within that cast.
it's
It's
it's what Star Trek does well. It's not right now. It's not interrogating the Cardassian policy or the Bajoran occupation. It is saying, what does this do to people? What has it done to Kira? What has it done to Armin Maritza? What has it done to Kanan? What has it done to these individuals who make individual choices? The background, the context is what the hell is government sanctioned activity on the scale like, but the reality of the story is what do individuals do when they are caught up in the wheels of a machine of horror, of a machine of nightmare and terror and all of that. That's what this episode is asking, and we can't analyze it any further because we don't have the information.
But in the chat here, the indoor cat
Oh,
says, I've seen quite a number of Holocaust documentaries and a few scenes from the Nuremberg trials and some docudramas, and read through some of the notes. Even though this character is acting as someone in charge,
yeah,
I wouldn't say it's a far off thing. The performance and the script are heavily based in the Nuremberg trials, in
absolutely.
the facts of what happened.
I am going to move for a quick break. We are
Yes, certainly.
2 hours in, but we do have a bit more to get through, and it's wearing on us. It is wearing on us. So I'm going to suggest we quickly go to standby, and we will return when we're ready to discuss this further. Is that okay with you, Kat?
In a few minutes' time. And for anyone who does need to go to bed now, we recognise that it's a weeknight. By all means do. You'll be able to catch the rest of this either back on Twitch, where it will remain streaming for, I think, a few days, and then it will be posted on YouTube. So don't feel that you have to stay with us now if you need to rest.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for sticking with us, and thank you to Lieutenant Indoor Cat for the fine advice of snacking, stretching, and hydrating. It was good just to get away and attend to things. This is a hell of an episode, and it is draining on us kind of mentally, but I also don't want to do it disservice by cutting any conversation short whilst balancing that against our very real physical needs. So we will progress at our comfort. And I think we concluded that final confrontation scene where Kira confronted Maritza and identified him as Goldar Heel. So I think we're good to go on to the next scene. I think, Kat, unless you had anything more to say about their that.
No, I don't think. No, we've wound up with Yes, we've moved. Yeah. Yes, let's carry on. I'm well enough to continue. I'm just a bit tired. We're all good. So we are now in ops where Kira is leaning back in her seat and staring upwards. And I think this scene effectively gives Kira and the viewer a break from the emotional intensity
100%.
of being in Goldar Heel's presence. And it gives Odo the opportunity to bring in new important information about what's going on. I think when we open on this scene, her face is tear-streaked, but alas, even on my large television screen, the resolution of the film is terrible. I can't tell for certain. I wish that I could. But Odo brings Kira a bright blue drink, which he says is a Moraltian Sieve ale from Quark's private stock.
I love that was almost an echo of The Next Generation, when occasionally people would dip into Guinan's private stock for the real, the real deal stuff. I think
nicely noticed.
I think Data scored some Aldebaran whiskey for Scotty in the episode Relics, and it was from Guinan's private stock. And I also like the fact that Odo knows Quark has a private stock. has access to it, and will absolutely take things from it with no questions asked. It's so quick and yet so wonderfully evocative. I thoroughly enjoyed that one moment. And finally, fourthly, the Odo, this grim impersonal alien embodiment of justice, is like, you need a drink. I will
Yeah.
get you a drink. It's a wonderful moment of solidarity, of sympathy. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's one line, and yet it says the world to me. I really enjoyed it.
That's lovely, Tim. Thank you for bringing that analysis. Kira says, I wonder how many others like Dahil are still out there, still free, unpunished. Odo responds, quite a few, no doubt, but thanks to you, there's one less out there now. Kira tells Odo that Maritza is proud of what he did to Bajorans, and Odo suggests that she go to her quarters and lie down for a while. We'll leave him alone with his Cardassian pride, which is another subtle mention of the racialization of the two sides, not just the pride of a violent murder, but his Cardassian nature is tied up with it. Kira says, no, that's what he'd like, another Bajoran hiding in a corner. She talks about her time in the Resistance and how they planned the assassinations of men like Dahil, and now she has to listen to him belittle the Shakar and everything it stood for. Odo suggests that she avoid discussing her personal history with a creature like that. Kira said that she didn't, so Odo very reasonably asks, then how did he know you were with the Shakar? She looks a little lost, and she just says, I don't know, he was an important military leader. Odo said, that doesn't explain it. If he'd been in charge of quelling Bajoran resistance, then he might have had your name on file. But he commanded a forced labour camp. Something's not quite right here.
I love that. I love that Odo immediately. That is Odo is best. He is immediately
Detective Odo.
Detective Odo. Something doesn't make sense. You've mentioned one fact that doesn't completely line up, and his senses are on. I love it. That is Odo at his best. I just really like that. He immediately picks up on it.
Yeah, it's nice for Odo, and it is a nice little bit of scripting because it fell very naturally in the conversation when Maritza mentioned the Shakar. It's believable. It's believable that Kira brings it up here because it's personal to her, and it's believable that with all the emotion she's feeling, she just didn't think through whether he would actually know that or not. It is a personal issue to her, and it didn't occur to her that it was weird that he knew what her role was. So yeah, I like it as a plot point. It works really well.
And you would think, again, any other time, I think Kira wouldn't have even noticed it. It's because she's talking to Odo. She's talking to somebody outside of it.
Yeah.
And it switches her instincts back on. Any other time, this would have worked. Maritza's plan would have worked. It's testament to the people she's around, and it's a really subtle kind of reminder that a crew in Star Trek works better when they help each other. They support each other. They all bring something to the table.
You're very right. It isn't just a matter of Dahil Maritza versus Kira. It's Kira with the backing of her supportive friends and colleagues on Deep Space Nine. Yes. Nice. But yes, Kira says that she's going to have another little chat with Gul Dahil. And Odo asks the computer to review all off-station requests for information regarding Major Kira Nerys within the last 8 months. So in the next scene, Maritza's in his cell, he's lying down. The camera's looking over him, over his body as he lies, and out towards the approaching Kira Nerys. Kira asks how he knew she was with the Shakar, and the camera slowly moves towards Maritza's face as he complains that the provisional government moves slowly. They should have dragged him away in chains by now. And I think at this point, Maritza's panicking slightly.
Yes.
He's worried that the jig might be up. He wants to be away and on trial as soon as he can be. Kira insists, and he insults her. He calls her a strutting little egotist. And he says, you forget the brilliance of Maritza's filing system. He made sure that I was provided with information on all your little terrorist bands.
It's a good recovery.
What I particularly enjoyed were the termination reports. And he recalls how he sometimes felt he was alone in exterminating Bajorans, but those reports reassured him that he was not alone. And Kira, very calm now, says, and I'm supposed to believe you remember my name from some report you read years ago.
Brilliant.
Maritza counters, I didn't remember you at all until I heard your name here. And then he knows that, he says he didn't remember her at all until he heard her name here. And he knows that that disturbs her. She replies, hardly. And he's still trying to rile her up and get her back into an emotional state whereby she just hates him and wants him dead.
Exactly.
Because that's the best way to get what he wants. He doesn't want someone who's calm and who might see through what's happening. He says that he has questions for her. She says these questions don't interest her. He asks if she's afraid to hear them. And Kira turns and walks away and sits on a chair some distance from his cell, just looking calmly towards him. We then go to a scene of Odo leaving a security office and walking past a group of people wearing grey cloaks and face coverings, who we have a picture of.
We do indeed. The Galatep survivors. Here we are.
So Quark, at this point in his first appearance in the episode, approaches and asks Odo who the grey-cloaked people are. Odo says they're survivors of Galatep who arrived early this morning. And there are two things I'd like to note here. Firstly, this editorial note is from Memory Alpha. It said, it is not clear why the Bajoran survivors of Galatep had their mouths covered when they gathered outside Constable Odo's security office. As Maritza has no such covering and did not indicate any trouble breathing or any sensitivity to allergens, it's likely that his exposure to the accident was perhaps less severe, or maybe the disease was in its earlier stages for Maritza, or maybe it affects Bajorans and Cardassians differently. I like that the editor on Memory Alpha has thought about it's an illness of the lungs, yet we haven't seen Maritza coughing, anything like that. They just haven't put that into the script. But they've thought here about how a group of people heavily affected might need to protect themselves from allergens and toxins. But secondly, I noticed that one of the people in a grey cloak is black, and I think that most of the Bajorans we've seen so far have been white or light-skinned.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
And I wondered whether, particularly when casting for this episode, they wanted to make an effort not to ring fence what Bajorans can look like, to emphasize that there can be different colored skin within Bajoran populations. It's just one extra in a scene, but it just struck me as being worthy of remark because we hadn't seen a black Bajoran yet, to my knowledge.
To my knowledge, either we haven't, no, and it's a good effort to get away from, as we've discussed previously, that somewhat unconscious Star Trek trope of the planet of hats. Well, not only does everybody act the same and think the same, but often they look the same. They're often white Caucasian, which is,
It feels a bit absurd when our own planet has various different races of people with different appearances.
Precisely. And later Star Treks have done better in realising that different planets will have, exactly different racial groups, whilst still falling within the defines of a progenitor species. We're all bipeds and we have, black, Asian, various minority ethnic compared to white Caucasian, which makes up, sadly, the majority of a TV show filmed and shot in the West. But you're absolutely right, and it's worth recognising, and it's worth kind of pointing out and saying there is diversity within these planets, and we should be grateful it is being shown. So that's a really good observation, Kat. Thank you. But yes, please get onto the glaring point of this scene.
Yeah, Quark, still in conversation with Odo, says, Galatep, imagine living through that hellhole. The pain, the sorrow. Do you think they like to gamble? Which I think is kind of perfect for Quark. I kind of like that station life continues as normal around the very remarkable events that are happening in the holding cell. I like that Quark is still very much himself. It keeps the action situated on the station rather than the whole episode feeling just set aside in a bubble from the rest of the show. I also like that Quark has heard of Galatep. He knows what happened there, that it's a famous place. It's known not only to Bajorans and Cardassians. Again, it keeps the scope of all of this within a wider world than just Bajor on the station.
It also maintains some continuity, which hasn't been explored very much and will be in later episodes, so no spoilers at this point. But remember that Quark was on the station before the Federation took over.
Yes.
He was here when it was Terok Nor, and at this point you don't know how long for, and I'm not going to say how long for, but it's presumable that's how he heard about it. And he was running probably a very similar establishment prior to the Federation takeover. So...
Which is why we had a huge amount of Yamak sauce coming in every month.
Because he was catering to a different clientele, primarily Cardassian. And you can infer from that what you want, and I will let the show take you to where it's going to take you. But Quark has a unique awareness of being somebody on Terok Nor who was neither Bajoran nor Cardassian prior to the Federation takeover, prior to Cardassian withdrawal from Bajor.
Interesting. I'll look forward to seeing more of that.
Exactly. It is going to be very interesting. But yes, I did note that it was discordant. It was discordant, but also actually in keeping with the character, and you know what, somewhat reminiscent of the writer's previous work on Move Along Home, which was a very Quark-centric episode and played to all of Quark's, I'm not going to say best traits, I'm going to say most prominent traits, shall we say.
I'm very fond of that episode personally. But yes, we now go to the infirmary where Bashir is at a console. The camera, and just again, nice little bits of camera work. The camera follows a Bajoran member of staff leaving the infirmary, and then Odo is walking in, and the camera follows him in towards Bashir. And Odo asks Bashir for help. 3 months ago, there was a request from Koratu for information concerning Kira Nerys. The name on the request was Armin Maritza. Odo has established a subspace link with Koratu and wants Bashir to access Maritza's medical history there. Dax then calls in. Gul Dukat is responding to Odo's subspace transmission. Odo goes to take it in his office. Okay, it's one of those little functional scenes of how are we going to get the information to where it needs to be. This is how we're going to do it. And we get a tiny bit more screen time for Bashir, who doesn't say very much. We've now got Gul Dukat on a comm screen in Odo's office, which I think we've got a picture of.
We do indeed. Oh, sorry, no, that's Gul Dukat in Cisco's office. Where is it? That's
12,
the
I
one.
think.
It's the round one, isn't it?
Yeah, the Cardassian console.
Wonderful. Excellent
Lovely.
design.
And again, I won't recount every part of this conversation. Dukat says that he misses working with Odo. He says, I miss our games of Kalivian Montar, which is a small reminder that Odo used to work for the Cardassian administration on Terok Nor before the Federation arrived.
Yeah.
Odo says, as I recall, Gul Dukat, we played one game and you cheated. Which I like that. I like that Dukat comes on all friendly, pally with Odo, and Odo just isn't having any of it.
And again, it's that smarmy attitude of Cardassian officers, and in particular, Gul Dukat. So it's very in keeping. And I'd forgotten that they had this, because again, it reminds us that not only was Quark on the station prior to Cardassian withdrawal, so was Odo. And it's never commented on, but I now, looking back, feel at this point, I was a little bit wary, because I was like, these characters have a history with the people we're meant to truly distrust that we don't know anything about. Are you telling me that Odo did the same job under the Cardassians?
Yeah, and I think we touched on that in A Man Alone when Odo is under suspicion.
Exactly.
And his role on the station is pointed to.
And that never goes away. So, excellent reminder. But it's another great chance for, as well, Dukat to chew the scenery and really, as you say, wonderfully ham it up in his smug, smarmasaur way with Odo. And I love that we played one game and you cheated. And all Dukat does is laugh, because...
Yeah, he laughs and says, same old Odo, like a blunt instrument.
A blunt instrument. Now, I find that really interesting, because it has no context. Are we saying that Odo goes directly to the truth, which, yeah, seems right? Is it that he is an unimaginative man, that he's a very direct investigator? We don't know. And I like that it leaves it very vague for you to interpret what you would about Odo. I don't know what you thought about that kind of read on him.
Yeah, I think I just read it as part of what I'd seen in Odo already, that he is very quick to act. He's very fast to put people away. He was keen. He's keen to uphold. I think it's been stated in different ways by different writers. Sometimes Odo is keen to uphold the law of whichever power he is working under. That's been stated before. When it was the Cardassians, he was to the letter on Cardassian law. Now that it's Federation, he is to the letter for them. Yes. But it's also been stated that he's a law unto himself.
Also, yes.
We don't know. He's still a very ambiguous character, is Odo. So yeah, I think I just did read it as his being quick to act, and it doesn't take any nonsense. I think he will speak up if he thinks that there's nonsense afoot. But yes, Gul Dukat then says he can't share the files on Dahil, but he can assure Odo that Dahil is dead. Odo says that isn't possible. Dukat says he attended the funeral himself. He's buried under one of the largest military monuments on Cardassia. And Odo asks, then who are we holding here? Dukat says he must be some innocent Cardassian citizen, and Dukat wants him released. And then again, we want this close-up. Ducat looks genuinely confused when Odo says that the man they're holding says that he is Goldahil. And I think there are ways that an actor can signify on screen whether the character is lying or not. And Ducat is not lying here. He genuinely looks confused. He's a man who's in power and likes to maintain the upper hand.
Yes.
And when Odo tells him that they've got Goldahil, he looks genuinely confused.
I also noted that. Visibly stunned, I said.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Which is just really nice. I like that there is a kind of an acting grammar for saying, no, I'm not faking this, actually. I'm just really confused by what you've just told me. And Odo says that the lie that he's Goldahil is likely to get him executed. So why would this man be saying that? And Ducat just repeats that he attended Goldahil's funeral. Half of Cardassia saw the body. Odo says that there's a photo of the labor camp that shows Dahil, who looks like the man they're holding. And Ducat, moving his head around, exercise. You're mistaken. This is obviously some plot to embarrass the Cardassian Empire. And Odo says, it's possible. Give me access to your files, and perhaps I can find some proof to support your claim that Goldahil is dead. And Ducat sighs, I suppose I could grant you limited access to the files. Odo says, I think that's wise. And then Ducat leaves without saying goodbye. It's a nice little exchange where Odo gets exactly what he wants by prodding Dahil in Ducat, in the direction he wants him to go. Makes him worried enough that he's willing to cede the point.
Again, as well, I love it. It's again great world building. For all Ducat is a posturing idiot and an aggressive bully boy, he is also worried. We've got to remember that Cardassia doesn't really want a war with the Federation either, and we're slowly learning that the Cardassians exist in an almost permanent state of paranoia and suspicion about everyone around them. And it's so exciting that Ducat is moved so quickly to the back foot. As you say, he's visibly stunned. He's like, wait, I don't understand what's going on. I'm used to being in complete control of the situation. He is worried, and he is willing to let Odo have access to the files, which he clearly doesn't want to do, because he thinks there is a bigger scope threat out there, which is good world building. And again, it's good ratcheting up the stakes. There's this constant concept of bigger things you don't understand moving around you, which is real, which is believable, which builds in an extra level of tension to what is normally, in Star Trek, what bad thing is going to happen to the ship this week, Can we not warp away? Can we not raise shields? No, this is bigger. This is politics. This is real world stuff moving far beyond what's going on here that makes you more invested in what's going on, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. So I'm so glad the scene was in there.
Yeah, and you said earlier about how much of the script is pushing us towards seeing individuals as people, individual journeys, individual pain in response to events. And with scenes like this one, the episode manages to balance that with the wider view of the world, with how what happens to Maritza here can impact on the world outside, which sets us up, which I think that does set us up for understanding Maritza's motive when it comes, when we find out that he wants to go to trial. That lives because we've seen something of Cardassia outside in the world and how they through Gul Dukat respond. It's just so masterfully done. Let's move on.
The only other thing I want to bump on is, and I don't know if this would have gotten your radar, Odo specifically says the man has given his name as Goldahil. That's not a name. Gul is a Cardassian rank, which
it is, yes.
Roughly analogous to captain, So Goldahil is probably equivalent to Captain Picard. So it wouldn't be his name. So it's just...
Is the name by which he goes, though? We would say that Captain Picard is Picard's name. And he's holding on to his rank because that's very relevant here. I think if we'd been given a full name without the title, I think it will be easy for an audience over just 45 minutes to lose sight of what its actual role is. So I think it is a shame we don't have a full name for the guy, but I think keeping it with Gul does... I think it suits the purposes of the script, even though it's an honorific or a title rather than a first name.
I would also say that this episode is so new in the series, they haven't even established that I don't think yet. It does. It actually becomes a plot point in a later episode, so I'm maybe inadvertently spoiling myself. So right
No, I
now,
think because we've got Gul Dukat, so I have assumed that Gul is a title given to
cool,
someone who's in a position of command.
excellent, excellent. Okay, so that's good to know.
Much
So
like the Daemon from the Ferengi. If you
bingo,
meet a Daemon
exactly the
something,
same.
you know that that's a rank rather than a name.
Exactly the same. Exactly the same. Cool. Well, if forgive me, a relative newcomer to
Oh,
DS9 picked up on that, then I'm probably worrying about nothing. So excellent. Thank you. But you're right to press us on, Cat.
so the next shot we get is a close-up of Kira in profile. This is a very short scene wherein Maritza is willfully angering Kira. If he were actually Dahil, we might believe it's just because he is crazed with power, with pride, and hates her for being Bajoran. But as Maritza, we know that he's trying to get her to have him sent to Bajor for trial and distracting her from the doubt that started forming in her mind. So on a first viewing, it looks like he's just quite crazed with pride. Yes. Second viewing, we know what he's trying to do. Kira says, I was 12 when I started fighting, but I've heard of some who were even younger than that. Yeah. And Maritza angrily responds, yes, let's get to the real issue. How many Cardassians did you kill? I mean, personally. Kira says, I didn't keep count. And he's still very angry and shouting, says, oh, I think you did. And I'm sure your total wasn't limited to military personnel. After all, the most effective terrorist weapon was random violence. Don't leave now, Major. It's just getting good. How many Cardassian civilians did you kill? And Kira, who started walking away and is almost through the door, turns and walks back and says, look, I regret a lot of what I had to do. He replies, how convenient of you. And she says, we had no choice. We were fighting for survival. He says, so were we. We had an empire to protect. We needed your resources. Everything I did was for the greater glory of Cardassia. And if you spineless scum had to be ground under, so much the better. All that mattered was Cardassia. I loved my homeland. That's what justified my actions. That's what gave me strength. And Kira replies, nothing justifies genocide. And he says, what you call genocide, I call a day's work. Odo then appears behind Kira and asks if he can speak with her. But yet again, just so many strong, emotive, to the point lines from both characters. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly strongly scripted. In the corridor. Sorry, Tim.
No, go on. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I found the scene amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I immediately bumped on the line of, there were two brilliant lines, which is the most effective terrorist weapon was random violence, and how many civilians did you kill? Jesus Christ, does that not open up a world of nightmarish interpretations? I mean, from when this episode was written in 1993, reaching back to the events of 1943 and all the way through to 2024 now, that question of what constitutes a legitimate military target in terms of terrorism is horrendous, because it puts us immediately in the situation of, right, Kira fought the Cardassians off of Bajor. We accept that the Cardassians should not have been there, and that they occupied Bajor illegally and with criminal, tyrannical intent. But were Bajorans justified in assassinating civilian, non-military combatants? That's been the question in the history of warfare in humanity since as long as we've recorded history. What a fucking question to ask. That blew me away. And I don't know where to take that. You know, that is just you have to interpret that as best you can.
It's again at this point in the episode when we still, as far as we know, he is Gul Dahil. We've just had it thrown into question that he might actually not be. Yep. It's still ramping up the tension. It's raising those big, and I think it is deliberately bringing up questions which will be emotive for a modern audience.
Yes, 100%.
If you haven't seen warfare firsthand, I've certainly seen news reports of it by 1993. The question of who is a freedom fighter, who is a terrorist, it's been current since, the 60s?
Oh, yeah.
At least, and probably before then. Oh, yeah. It's very deliberately pulling on the emotions of a 1990s audience. Mm-hmm. While dealing with a situation in 23rd century Star Trek. It's a very carefully achieved mixing of the two cultures in a way that will draw the audience to feel strongly for this completely fictionalized situation.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, they use language that we would all immediately recognize. Yes, you know, the assassination of Cardassian non-militants is probably a crime. You know, I think in the complex Byzantine laws of this kind of thing, you know, a uniformed enemy soldier is a combatant and therefore, sadly, you know, legitimate target. Civilian supporters of that government, how culpable are they? We're back to that question of
But it
culpability.
is, I think it is both a legitimate question to ask,
Yeah.
who is a fair target at a time of war? It's also a way of distracting from the real question, which is, who is this man? What crimes has he committed? We know that Goldar Hill murdered people at Galatep. There's
Yep.
no question of that. And instead of confronting that question head on, he's throwing Kira's innocence into question.
Exactly.
It's a way of distracting from his absolute. Precisely, it's provocative rather than sincere, rather than a sincere attempt to get to a moral truth. It's a way of angering Kira further by trying to throw her ethics into question.
And that is balanced completely. I promise the last thing I'll say on this. It's balanced completely by that horrendous line, which is what you call genocide, I call a day's work.
Yeah.
Immediately, well, actually, you know what? Civilian people who support this machinery, this system we've set up to process horrendously Bajorans, it's just work to some people. It's just a job. I'm not even a soldier. I don't pick up a gun, but I run the filing, the HR, the logistics that make this machine run. I have culpability in this system. I am responsible for it. I didn't kill anybody. I didn't pull a trigger, but I did something that meant somebody could. And it's back there, and it's right in front of you. There it is. How do you decide who is a legitimate target?
Yeah.
Who is culpable? Who deserves to die in this system? It's horrendous, and it's a hell of a question to put in front of a 93 audience who just tuned in to see spaceships.
It's hugely emotive and deliberately so. It doesn't want you to rest through this episode. It wants you to feel morally conflicted. The writers, rather, who wrote the script, want you to feel the weight of that moral conflict. And I think that very, very few viewers, children perhaps, people who don't have experience of watching the news, who don't know much of what's happening in the world, might not respond so strongly. But the vast majority of adults would.
This episode came out 30 years ago. It's nearly as old as us, and it still has a horrendous emotional impact. That's testament to good writing and good acting, but it leaves a lot of questions that we can't. That's the other thing. It leaves us with a legacy of questions we still can't answer.
They're not questions that we're meant to resolve in the context of the episode or out. They're raised without being resolved.
Thank you, Kat. You've indulged me.
Oh, no, that's all right. We will move onwards in the corridor just outside the holding cell area. The scene is shot as a short series of close-ups of Odo and Kira's faces. Odo says, Dr. Bashir and I have done some checking. I don't know why yet, but the man in that cell wants to be caught. Kira looks back at Maritza in his cell. We then fade to black. The next scene is in Sisko's office. Odo says, this certificate of death was in the file sent to me by Gold Ducat, and he passes a pad to Sisko, who says, according to this, Goldar Hill died in his sleep 6 years ago. Cause of death, massive calibric hemorrhage. From Memory Alpha, a calibric hemorrhage was a massive bleeding specific to Cardassian anatomy. It was typically fatal. And this is the only reference to it in Star Trek. It's not even in any of the stories in Memory Beta in the non-canon publications. A calibric hemorrhage killed Goldar Hill.
And that's it. We never hear again. That's some comprehensive research. Thank you, Kat.
But again, it's lovely world building. They haven't given him a heart attack. They've given him something specific to his Cardassian anatomy. It's just a nice thing to have noticed. And to have put in there. Kira says, Commander, I guarantee you that is a forged document. I think it's pretty clear what's going on here. The Cardassians are trying to trick us into letting him go. Sisko says, I wouldn't put that past our friend Gold Ducat. And Odo says, nor would I. However, and Kira insists, the man in there confessed he is Goldar Hill. This is a point at which there is evidence to the contrary, and Kira desperately wants him to be Goldar Hill.
Yes, which is what he wants.
Yes, despite that doubt having been placed there by Odo already, Goldar Hill Maritza has successfully pressed those buttons, as once which we said we ourselves feel very raised to anger by those questions.
100%.
He's done it so successfully that she just wants to push ahead and try him. She's not thinking about what the truth is anymore. Odo says, Major, the man in there has Kalanora syndrome, and Kira says, of course he does. And Odo says that according to the evidence I've been sent, Goldar Hill never contracted that condition. Kira says, more evidence from our trustworthy Gul Ducat. And Sisko says, well, what have you got, Constable? And Odo has found evidence that Dahil's progress reports from Galatep show that at the point when the mining accident occurred, he was back on Cardassia being awarded the Proficient Service Medal. And I love that there's a very deliberate, horrible irony in the fact that the man avoided contracting a disease that everyone else in the labour camp got because he was being rewarded for his good service. It's realistic, it's horrible, it's a good reason for him to have been away. It will have been sufficiently documented. In terms of the cogs of the script, it works as a plot device for having him off-world at that point. And it's that beautiful irony that he was being rewarded for the murders that he'd committed, that he escaped getting this illness that everyone else now suffers from. It's a good choice.
It's tiny and yet incredibly emotionally impactful. Yeah, I also thought it was a wonderful moment. I mean, for the worst possible fucking reasons, but yeah, it was.
Sisko says if he wasn't at Galtep on the day of the accident, then he couldn't have contracted Kalanora. Nodo says correct, but the man we're holding does have it. Kira says, I can't believe I'm listening to this. And Odo goes on, I'm afraid there's more, Major. I inquired about this man's last 2 weeks on Korra 2. He resigned his position at the military academy, put all his affairs in order, and even provided handsomely for his housekeeper, I understand. Kira says, all right. So, like any criminal, he wanted to move on before someone traced his whereabouts. Odo says he specifically requested passage on a vessel that was scheduled to stop here at a Bajoran station. Rather unusual request for a Cardassian war criminal, as Sisko says, unless he wanted to be captured. And Kira says, wait a minute, let's be clear about one thing. This evidence may raise some interesting questions. Nevertheless, Dahil is going to be sent back to Bajor to stand trial for the atrocities he committed. And Sisko says, Major, that is still to be determined. And Kira says, well, then go talk to him. If you still have any doubts, listen to what he has to say. He was there. He did it. He'll tell you about it. Sisko's about to reply when Bashir arrives and says, Constable, I've checked on Maritz's medical record. He's under treatment of Kalanora syndrome, of course, and a few other minor ailments, most relating to his age. It's all pretty standard, really, except for one thing, and I put in my notes, the fucking lead, Bashir.
Can I also point out that he walks into Sisko's office, he doesn't use the doorbell, and he talks to Odo first. He doesn't talk to Sisko, his commanding officer.
Chain of command, Bashir.
It's just everything he does is just a bit off in that sequence.
But it feels like Bashir, though. He is just a bit ditzy.
100%. Yeah, I can see it.
But yeah, he comes in talking about, he's got Kalanora. He's had some other things related to his age. And 5 years ago, after arriving on Korra 2, he started taking massive doses of dermatyralian plasticine, which is a dermal regenerative agent used to retain skin resilience after cosmetic alteration. Doesn't come in with, this guy's had plastic surgery, his face isn't his own face.
Doesn't look like he's in
medical records, age, Kalanora.
I know. You're right. It's very in character for him to absolutely miss the important point and be like, well, here are the facts. In a setting order of what I think is important and just be totally dead wrong.
Oh, bless him. But yes, Bashir says, you're saying he changed his face to look like Goldahil. And Bashir says, it certainly appears to be that way. And yeah, I noticed there is potentially a small timeline problem with this, in that Odo, according to Odo's research earlier in the episode, Maritza only resigned his position at the military academy in his last 2 weeks on Korra 2 and then came straight to Deep Space Nine. So he had the surgery 5 years ago, and then for 5 years minus those 2 weeks, he's been working in a military academy while wearing another military man's face.
Which, the face of a man who died the year previously, because we know Dahil died 6 years ago.
Yes.
So 5 years ago, the man you knew as Maritza suddenly looks like one of the most celebrated heroes of Cardassia.
And, the students might not know. They might not have seen the face of Goldahil, but surely the other teachers would have. Was he just some obsessive who loved Dahil so much that he changed his face? I'm just picturing Cardassian tabloids covering the story of this one weird teacher who changed his face to look like his hero. But there's nothing of that. It's just not... I think there is just an older media assumption that his face was not well known.
Yeah, Yes,
He
that's
didn't
it.
have his face in publications that the other Cardassians would have seen, an assumption perhaps that all news is text-based, so they knew his name but not what he looked like. But it just felt like a very strange omission. I'm glad you picked up on it as well, the
I
timeline being
did.
weird.
My only resolution to this is that they maybe swapped it around. That actually 2 weeks ago he had the surgery and he's now on the medication. And he
Yeah.
left immediately after. That's the only thing that would make sense. And that, 5 years ago he started setting this up and then he got the surgery and then he moved. Because, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's no way you go to a military academy and you don't immediately learn the face of one of Cardassia's most celebrated heroes. It doesn't make any sense. So,
No, I think that they probably had, one of the science consultants probably said to recover from plastic surgery, really. I know this is the future, and they felt that it just sounded better. He's been on medication for this length of time that helped to regenerate.
yeah.
It sounds more medically viable, but yeah, it would have been better if he changed his face recently and came straight here rather than living with Golda Hill's face for 5 years.
5 years
But
and
I
nobody
suppose what
knows.
it does do is it sets up his plan
Yes.
that long ago. He's been planning this for a long time. He wanted to finish doing his teaching, put his affairs in order before enacting this. So yeah, in some ways it works well. In other ways, yeah, I kind of wish they'd resolved that a little more neatly.
I would agree. I noticed that Lieutenant Indo Katz giving us some historical political context, which was that when this episode aired in June '93, it was in the aftermath of the US involvement in the Gulf War, and 2 weeks before the US launched missiles to Baghdad after an assassination attempt on former President G.W. Bush. So this is also coming within the context of political machinations and those kind of brush wars between Kardashian and the Federation that were analogous to the US involvement in the Middle East. So there is some horrible relative, newsworthy content as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That.
That's very much worth knowing, bearing in mind for the episode and the impact it had on the audience at the time.
Yeah, exactly. But this is it. I think Kira goes back in now to the cells for her final confrontation with Maritza.
Yes, she walks in slowly, looks a lot calmer than before, and she asks, "How are you feeling?" And Maritza replies, "I was starting to get a little bored, but seeing you again brightens my day."
Back
Kira
to
says,
that.
"I was referring to your Kalanora syndrome. Would you like to see Dr. Bashir?" And Maritza says, "Oh, so that's it. You want to see me writhing around the floor in pain. A Cardassian would never put on such a deplorable display in front of Bajoran. You just don't understand us at all. He's still trying to rile her up, trying to keep her angry."
Yes, exactly.
She's being far too calm for his liking.
Mm.
And she says, "I'm beginning to understand a great deal about you. One thing does puzzle me." And what would that be? How you contracted Kalanora syndrome. And he says, "Do you think that a mining accident affected only the Bajoran laborers and not their Cardassian masters? That would be very nice." And she replies, "So you're saying you were at Galatep when this mining accident occurred?" And he says, "Of course. Why are we going over this again?" And she tells him about the progress report showing that he was in Cardassia at the time of the accident. And not meeting her gaze, he says, "That's ridiculous."
Mm-hmm.
And she says, "Receiving your proficient service medallion." And he's clearly agitated now, still not looking at her. He says, "The reports are wrong." And she says she can show them to him. And he laughs and says, "That won't be necessary. I know where I was." So she asks why he was taking a dental regenerative. He doesn't know what she's talking about. And she says, "Then let me help you. 5 years ago, when you first got to Korra 2. And he's angry and upset now and says, "Your presence no longer amuses me. Get out." She asks why he had his face altered. He's shouting for security now. "Security, get this woman out of here."
Yeah.
And she asks, "Why are you pretending to be Golda Heel?" And he asks, "Why don't you ask me something intelligent? As for instance, how did I feel when we were withdrawing from Bajor?" The answer is, "I was furious. The thought of leaving any survivors behind was repulsive to me." Again, he's choosing subjects that are going to be heavily emotive for Kira. And he continues, "So while our useless office clerks were packing their precious files, I ordered my overseers to begin slaughtering the laborers." And she says quietly, "If you felt that way about your filing clerks, why did you take Maritza's name?" And he's still shouting, "My plan was to do nothing less than kill every Bajoran in the camp. And to this day, my one regret is that I was not able to accomplish this honorable goal." And she very quietly says, "You're Maritza, aren't you?" And he narrows his eyes incredulously and says, "You mistake me for that bug, that whimpering nothing. Oh, you stupid Bajoran girl. Don't you know who I am? I'm your nemesis. I'm your nightmare. I'm the butcher of Galatep." It's, again, he's in full-on villain mode here. Harris Yulin giving it everything to this final performance of Maritza, trying to sell it to Kira. And she says, the butcher Galatep died 6 years ago. You're Eamon Maritza, his filing clerk. And this is the most emotive part of the scene for me.
It hit me really hard.
Maritza replies, that's not true. I'm alive. I will always be alive. And shouting again, it's Maritza who's dead. Maritza, who was good for nothing but cowering under his bunk and weeping like a woman, who every night covered his ears because he couldn't bear to hear the screaming for mercy of the Bajorans. And at this point, he just starts sobbing, and he sits back on his bed and sniffs loudly, and he continues to breathe audibly between speaking. And Harris Yulin is putting everything into this. His body is still affected with emotion every line after this. He says, covered my ears every night, but I couldn't bear to hear those horrible screams. You've no idea what it's like to be a coward and do nothing. Maritza's dead. He deserves to be dead. And Kira keeps looking at him, but now with a much softer expression. And she turns off the force field to his cell. He says, what are you doing? And she says, I'm letting you go. And he keeps shouting for security to get in there. And then Kira walks into his cell, and he very quickly moves back on the bed. He pulls his legs up to it.
He recoils visibly.
Yes, as if he's terrified of her. And she sits down a couple of feet from him and says, you didn't commit those crimes, and you couldn't stop them. You were only one man. And he continues, no, don't you see? I have to be punished. We all have to be punished. Major, you have to go out there and tell them that I'm Goldahil. It's the only way. And Nana Visitor has tears in her eyes while she moves closer to be with him and says, why are you doing this? And his reply really struck me. He says, for Cardassia. Cardassia will only survive if it stands in front of Bajor and admits the truth. My trial will force Cardassia to acknowledge its guilt. And we're guilty, all of us. My death is necessary. I'll give Kira's line before we look at this. Kira replies to him, what you're asking for is another murder. Enough good people have already died. I won't help you kill another. And if I may, Tim, there are two things I wanted to note about this scene. Firstly, that initially I struggled a bit to get down a solid analysis of Kira's arc in the episode. That looking back through it, I don't think there's a single instance of Kira making any statement against all Cardassians. She says things like, not only is he a Cardassian, he's a war criminal. And I think that if the arc was intended to be that at the beginning of the episode she hated all Cardassians, but now she knows some of them could be good, they didn't hammer home her hatred of all Cardassians. I don't think that's Kira's arc here. I think that the change for Kira in this episode is more about her willingness to see the truth and her compassion both being shown to be demonstrably stronger than her desire for vengeance, which she admitted earlier on was her primary motivator. And I think that for us, the audience, it's very affecting to see a character whose side we're very strongly encouraged to take. We're encouraged to sympathize with Kira a great deal prior to this episode and during it. We see her moving from anger and vengeance into compassion. And that's a really powerful change to watch, especially when it's delivered by an actor as strong as Nana Visitor. Her going from visibly, you can see on her face how much she hates the man, to her melting and feeling sorrow for him in this scene. It's incredibly powerful to watch. But I also found it interesting that Maritza, when asked why he was doing it, says he did it for Cardassia and that Cardassia will only survive if it stands in front of Bajor and admits the truth. And my reading of this is that he doesn't hate Cardassia, but he hates what Cardassians have done and what Cardassia has stood for and what it has become. He feels that his people need to admit their collective guilt, the ones who acted against Bajorans and those like himself who failed to stop those who acted against them, in order for the Cardassians to move forward as a people. Although he says that his death is necessary, that doesn't mean that he thinks they all deserve to die, and he doesn't want to destroy his people and his homeland. He wants them to be better. And in the next scene, he says that his trial might have helped to bring about a new Cardassia. I think it's a very thoughtful thing to have included here. Because he could have said, I'm doing this because I hate myself and my people, which might have been part of the truth.
I think
but it
definitely.
would have been a far... Sorry, Tim.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you. Please, do not let me interrupt your flow. Please carry on.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think that him hating himself and his people for what they've done might be part of what he's feeling. But it would have upheld an idea that the guilty side has to be conquered and beaten and overcome, that there could be no hope for a better future for a group of people that had committed those atrocities against others. But instead, he's doing it for his people so that they can survive and so that there can be a new and better Cardassia. And I think that that combined with Kira's compassionate insistence that he should live, I think that the message at the end of this scene is that everyone on both sides of the conflict should live, that everyone should move forward in full knowledge and acceptance of what they've done. And it feels like a very simplistic message, but it's very radical. And it's a radical message about how conflicts on various levels can be dealt with, accountability rather than vengeance. And it serves to make the upcoming end of the episode all the more devastating.
Brilliant.
I spent far too long writing that out and thinking about what I thought about it, because I'd expected something more simplistic. I'd expected but my people got it wrong and we have to be held accountable. And he does say we all need to be punished. But he then goes on to say that he wants Cardassia to be better. Cardassia needs this, not that Bajor needs this. He isn't doing this just for the victims in the camps. He's doing this because he believes it's good for his people. And that's incredibly powerful.
I mean, this whole scene, was my tipping point. I found it incredibly difficult. I'll tackle what you're raising first, which is, it's a Star Trek answer. It is I hate to simplify it because it's not, but a Star Trek answer is the third way. It's not, as you say, that an enemy needs to be conquered and shown the right way. It is the actual complexity of an individual realizing that their race, their people need to own and act and move in a different direction. And I'm pleased to say that this is a theme that will run throughout Deep Space Nine. This constant revisiting of Cardassia's past and looking to its future will be a constant running political subflow to the series. I also want you to hang on to this very much when you view characters like Ducat and Garak and other Cardassian people we will meet. And keep it in mind, because Deep Space Nine itself doesn't know what it's got, and I'm going to say this straight up now. They do not apply a uniformity to how they view Cardassia's history. The brilliant goals that Maritza espouses, which are what should be adopted, do not get uniformly applied throughout the series. And whenever we cover a Cardassian lore episode, we should view it in the lens of how did Duet introduce it. So that's something I want you to hang on to, and I will look forward to how you feel Deep Space Nine does it. In the broader context and tying back to the obvious parallels to the Holocaust, we ran the Nuremberg trials. The Americans did, I suppose. And we punished Nazis. We punished officials. Did we punish Germans? No, we didn't. How Germany deals with its history and its legacy, and I don't want to do this because it's very close to real world stuff which we don't want to touch, but how Germany negotiates that history is very important. It is seen as the decisions of people, not Germans. It is not tied to a racial or a political. Well, it is political. It's difficult because I've not made any notes because I don't know how the hell to address it.
It is extremely complex, and we have to bear in mind that it was sanctions placed on Germany as a whole, the entire German people, in the aftermath of World War One, that paved the way for the rise of the Third Reich and World War II.
German people made these decisions to create this structure, but they were Nazi. I don't know. There is no easy answer to this. And I don't want to dwell on this because we can't. We're two people doing a podcast on a show that came out on popular telly 30 years ago. We can't negotiate this. All I'm saying is that is the context. It is asking very, very briefly, who the hell is responsible? And that is what Maritza is doing. He's saying, Cardassia is not this. Cardassia did this. The Cardassian military, the people from Cardassia did these things. They built these camps and they did these things. And the only way to deal with it is the way that humanity dealt with it. We held the trials. We tried to punish the people responsible. And to go beyond that, we tried Slobodan Milosevic when it came down to Serbian genocides. We had the truth and reconciliation efforts in South Africa and an attempt to reconcile white South African rule in black South Africa. These are horrendously complex topics you can't cover in 45 minutes of popular television. It can't be done. But these are real world events that we can relate to, and that is the context. As horrendously real and as horrendously hard as it is to negotiate, that's the context. And you're absolutely right to focus on it. That there is suddenly a complexity. That Cardassia, we have seen the smarmy, arrogant, racist Ducat represent an aspect of Cardassia.
Yes,
Deep
but
Space
he
Nine,
isn't all of Cardassia.
and he isn't, exactly. And Deep Space Nine will go out and it will show us people that are not that. That are people that just live there, like there were people who lived in Germany during the 30s and 40s who weren't part of this. And it is that complexity that Deep Space Nine wants us to explore, as hard as that fucking is. And finally, the only other thing I want to end on is that Armin Maritza was a man on telly in the 90s who was sad. And he was upset, and he was hurt, and he was traumatized. And he was allowed to express that trauma and that hurt and that pain. He cried, which was not something that I think 90s telly was very good at.
You're right, and he is, at the end of the episode, he's an admirable figure for those feelings.
He was not punished for showing emotion as a man, which I think is still something popular telly struggles with. Popular entertainment struggles with letting a man show emotion.
You're very right.
That kind of thing. And I found that really hard. I'm going to be straight up and honest and expose myself that I do not see that enough. And I find it difficult to actually see. I find it difficult to see a man show emotion.
It's an incredibly touching scene for that reason.
It really is. And it hit me then. It hit me then when I saw it 30 years ago when it was shown, and it hits me now because I am still not used to it. And that's just something I want to personally kind of share, is that I found it really, really impactful for that this man was sad. And he was so very sad. And it was really, really horribly real.
Yeah. And to sit alongside that, I don't wish to draw power from that, because it is an incredible thing to have a male character be shown to be suffering unambiguously, to have cried, to cry on screen.
Yeah.
But I appreciate how throughout the episode, Kira expresses a lot of emotion.
Yes.
You said that Night Visitor often does. She's very good at very quickly expressing strong emotion within character.
Which is not normal.
And the character is never criticized for that.
No.
Nobody suggests that Kira shouldn't be doing this because she's too upset, because she's being too emotional. There are none of those sexual microaggressions in here. No one ever treats her anger and her sadness as inappropriate. And I really appreciate that within the episode. And I think that it's that same principle that underpins their willingness to have Maritza cry at the end of the episode and not be shamed for it in character.
Nobody's emotional reaction to what goes on in this episode is ever dismissed.
Yes.
And it's understandable within the context of these are serious events, but it's also, and this is something that we struggle with today, which is that people should be allowed to be emotional. People should be allowed to feel an emotional reaction to things they are confronted with without being belittled or dismissed for it, which is something we struggle with really and in entertainment today. We're getting better, but it's bad, and it is brave of Star Trek to have bridged that.
And I think that particularly the moral heart of this episode, the fact that it is Maritza's feelings that make him who he is. It's his feelings and his deep sorrow, his having been traumatized by screams that other people could turn away from, not care about, glory in even. Yeah, it's an episode that calls for compassion and has emotion as a strong part of that, compassion for the feelings of others and bringing our own emotions while we're feeling compassion when we are interacting with others, when we're trying to resolve these problems. It's not spoken overtly, but
and it doesn't need to be.
This episode.
It doesn't need to be, and this episode has in fact oddly been wholly structured around not having compassion. The whole plot is supposed to evoke in you a tremendous sense of right and wrong. Maritza was wrong. He was part of an evil regime. The Bajorans are all victims. Everybody is in a black or a white camp, and all the Cardassians deserve to be punished. And we realise finally at the end that they don't. And there was far more complexity, and there was hurt on both sides. And this was not a crime against Bajorans, which admittedly it was, but it was a crime against right-thinking people. It was a crime against a morality that transcends alien cultures, alien societies. It's basic morality that has been violated on a galactic scale. And we finally end up sympathising with poor Maritza, and it is Kira who extends that brilliant strand of understanding, which is one more murder will not improve this. It will solidify this crime. If we punish you and kill you unlawfully for this, yeah, I can see in a horribly, coldly political sense that this will expose a crime. But your death will...
He's a good man, and they need him to remain alive.
Reinforce the crime that's been committed here. It will make it worse, which sets up, most horribly, the conclusion of this episode.
Yes.
Please, take us forwards, please.
Yes, at the end of that scene, Maritza closes his eyes and rests his head against the wall of his cell, looking defeated, and Kira looks down with tears in her eyes. We then have an external shot of Deep Space Nine, and we cut to Kira and Maritza leaving the security office together, with him following her and Odo close behind them. Kira says, "You should be back in Korra 2 in 3 days." Maritza says, "Well, there's nothing there for me to go back to." And Kira tells him, "We've contacted officials there. They'll be waiting for you." It's a compassionate statement. She's saying that they have... It's them thinking about how he will be after this. She isn't abandoning him to his fate. She's not just letting him leave and go back to nothing. She's recognised that he's suffered a great deal, and she wants someone to be there to look after him. Maritza says, "If they believed that I was Goldar Hill, then my trial might have helped to bring about a new Cardassian. Now you've told them I was just a file clerk." And Kira says, "What you tried to do was very honourable. If Cardassia is going to change, it's going to need people like you." And at this point, the camera pauses to let Kira, Maritza, and Odo walk past, and it focuses in on someone in the background, Kanon, the drunk Bajoran from the cell at the start of the episode, who is sitting on a bar seat drinking again. He watches them go past. He stands up from his bar seat. It takes seconds. He takes a small bladed weapon from his jacket. He runs up behind Maritza, quickly grabs his arm and drives the weapon into Maritza's back. Maritza cries out, and Kira holds him as he falls to his knees and then onto his back. Kanon struggles as Odo holds him back. Maritza closes his eyes, and Kira looks up at Kanon with her face full of sorrow and anger and demands, "Why? He wasn't Dahil. Why?" Kanon says, "He's a Cardassian. That's reason enough." And Kira, still crying, says, "No, it's not." And the final shot is the camera moving out from Kira's face to take in Maritza's body below her, the knife lying beside his body, and the approaching crowd of onlookers who form a horseshoe around the pair as the scene fades to black. And that's where it ends. And it's a brutal ending.
Yeah.
It's an ending that cuts hope short after seeing that this person who wanted to die for the cause could remain alive and keep fighting for it. Yeah, it's a very painful, powerful ending to the episode, and I think it ended so that it would have that impact. So we're not left with a softer, through diplomacy things can be better. We're left with, if racial animosity continues, good people will die.
Yeah, 100%. It's horrible. It is a horrendous end, and I hate to say it, but I think it's right. I think it's real. And that is DS9's biggest strength, is that it's believable. It's real. And the reality, sadly, is that horrible things will happen to good people, even when they're trying to make something better, because that is what really happens. It's what invests me so much in DS9, is that I can see it, and it's so real and believable, even when it's absolutely the worst like this.
It doesn't feel sugar-coated. It doesn't feel as if they haven't given us an easy response. There isn't a from here we'll go forward and do this and everything will be okay. It's if people can stick around, stay alive, act with compassion, look for the truth, then even a society that a large number of people within it have committed atrocities, that society can heal and needs to heal for itself. Bajor needs to have justice, and the only way we could do that is by having the truth spoken.
Precisely.
It's a lot. I think this episode is saying a lot of things.
It is.
I think it does it incredibly well and in a very nuanced and careful way. They avoid a lot of pitfalls that it could have fallen into. And yeah, it's an incredibly powerful piece of television. I think it stands alone as a short play. I really want to see or read the scripts to The Man in the Glass Booth, the Robert Shaw play. I would like to know how much of this episode was drawn from it, whether how far the script similarities go, how much it owes to that play.
Yes, I would as well. It's incredible. It's incredible that it still, and it's sad that it still has such a resonance today in that, you know, it's devoid of the history that clearly inspired it. It still sadly has resonance with events that take place today. And again, I would urge you to bear this in mind, because that particular strand of Deep Space Nine will emerge, and there will be further episodes that negotiate this particular concept of Cardassian legacy, and of its future, and of people involved. So, which weirdly will suffer from different writers approaching it with different attitudes and a lack, in my opinion, of control from above. So there will be different approaches to how Cardassian's legacy with Bajor is examined, and it will be very interesting to get your interpretation on them. But those are future events.
Yeah, I think this episode, I can only imagine how many times they passed over the script and refined it, because it's very impactful. It's very, again, on a basic can you follow the narrative level, it's incredibly well done. It's very clear. It's also very emotional. And yes, they must have worked so hard, the various writers and editors, to make sure that it works and it says what they want it to say. And I don't expect that every single episode that touches on these themes will have the same degree of attention given to it, sadly. So I can imagine that there will be somewhat clumsier episodes dealing with similar things.
I think it's wonderful that you have already grasped exactly the intent that came with it, and that you are willing to extend that understanding to the future. That is sadly the both the boon and the curse of episodic television, which is you roll a dice and you either get a duet or you get a vortex, and you never know quite which is going to come up. I see
So
that
yes,
Kat has asked in chat that they've observed that Kira is a good person. I think that's because Maritz's ultimate culpability at Galatech was minor, insofar as we never really discussed that hard concept of how much involvement in the state mechanism are you responsible for its activities, versus his intentions, which are he was willing to sacrifice himself, sacrifice his life to expose it.
and I think the fact that he had the emotional response that he did, that he describes himself having cried every night while he was there, it shouldn't be an extraordinary response. It should be the response that every person would have to hearing screams of terror.
Exactly.
But it marks him out from the other people who were there, and the fact that it has remained with him, he hasn't tried to suppress it within himself. He hasn't tried to just move away from it and never think about it again. It stayed with him, and he had as we've discussed, a long plan over 5 years to come here and do this, and to try and get some justice, to try and change his world for the future.
I also think it's...
I think there is a lot in that is admirable, and I can see why Kira says that she thinks he is a good man, despite his not being able, not feeling able, not acting to change things at the time.
I also think as well, it's worth bearing in mind, we heard that Kira became a resistance fighter at 12. She picked up a phaser and was willing to kill to defend her home. That's a brave woman. Comparatively, we know from Maritz's breakdown, he was a coward. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to do this. He was scared, and he ended up traumatized by what he saw. And he still managed, through the horrible trauma of that, to pull together a plot, a very elaborate plot, to expose it on the galactic stage and it's incredible in its complexity, and that it was done by a man who was traumatized and, in his own admission, not brave. He overcame incredible obstacles to try and do this. I do think those are the actions of somebody truly altruistic.
Yeah, the indoor cat has come back and said, I always make the argument that no one is wholly good or bad, but
Sure.
coming out of a regime like that,
This is
being in a role to do the logistics at a labour camp, but also, yeah, I guess it's the PTSD reaction.
it's
But
it's
yeah, I think it's, yeah, as we've said, they're not questions that can be answered in 45 minutes of Star Trek, but I think that they're very brave in approaching those questions. And I think that, yeah, as Tim says, Maritza is a very different person to Kira. He has not been brave through his life. He's very ashamed of how frightened he was. But I think Kira actually says in that scene, you were one person, that you couldn't have stopped it.
But she was one person who stood up and tried to stop
That's
it.
true. Yeah, he could have left his role and tried to join some form of resistance, tried to use some of his administrative skills to try and put together something different, but he didn't.
He didn't, because he was a coward. We can go around in circles with these questions, but we have been on this one now for a record 3 hours 14 minutes. So, Cat, I will give you the chance to. Yes, indeed. Lieutenant Indoor Cat does point out that there are spoilers, because this is, as I said, a thread that runs through DS9. So we'll not dwell anymore. I guess I'll just give you the chance. Any kind of parting thoughts? I've kind of shared all my parting thoughts. So anything you feel we haven't covered?
I don't think so. I think I would just like to say that I was kind of dreading covering this episode on the podcast, because we usually take such a light tone with it, because usually it's Star Trek. It's fun and it's ambitious and it's dramatic and it's very silly, and that's what I enjoy about it for the most part. But I do love that. I love the daring of the writers, the producers,
So glad you think so.
everyone who was involved in putting this episode together. Is something that I would not have the courage to attempt, because the risk of broaching such strong, real themes that were people still alive in the 90s who had been in labor camps under the Nazis, to dare to broach that within the context of a sci-fi TV show, which within the broader culture is often mocked for being very marginal, silly people wearing latex kind of show. I think it was very brave, and they put a hell of a lot of work into making it work. And I'm very glad that we've been able to do this episode to discuss some of that. I think it would have been doing a disservice. Not that I think any of them are delighted that we're doing this necessarily, but it would have felt like a terrible omission not to have covered this episode. So I'm glad that we have done it. I might be interested to look back at this again in a few years, having seen more Deep Space Nine, and hopefully having deepened my own nuanced understanding of the politics that underlie this episode.
I would absolutely want that. And as I say in many of these episodes, your initial impression of these episodes is so crucial, because it gives those of us who've seen it all a wonderful lens to reevaluate our impression of these episodes. And I'm so glad you guard yourself against these spoilers. And I know it's really, really difficult, notwithstanding the stream of memes you get on a regular basis.
Yeah, there are some things I know about Deep Space Nine that I should not know about Deep Space Nine yet, just because of the memes.
Curses, they're so good. They're just so good. What are you meant to do? But yes, please do hang on to it, because there are, as Indoor Cat and I refer to, there are other episodes that will navigate similar territory, and it will be very interesting then to weigh this up against. I would say that it's very difficult for Deep Space Nine to ever get near this high watermark again, but it will come very close in future episodes on very similar topics, and it will be very interesting to interpret it then. This was hard. This was really goddamn hard. I think both you and I discussed it in the setup, which was that, we both found this episode emotionally very impactful and difficult. And I am so glad you did agree to go ahead with it. I'm really glad I did, even though it was very unpleasant.
I am now glad to have done it, and hopefully to have some silly episodes in the near future. I just want to see Garak being camp for a bit.
We've got a little bit more horror to plough through, I'm afraid. Not on this level, I'm pleased to say, but admittedly, those of you know, the next episode will be In the Hands of the Prophets, the season finale of Series 1, which introduces us formally to Vedek Wynn. And it's
It's
just
the Opera House.
she is indeed wearing the Sydney Opera House on her head. She is a complex and provocative character, to say the least. And I do not think next episode will be much more fun to negotiate, but it will at least be a little bit easier. It is now 11:20. I am going to release us all, but I am going to sincerely thank Kat for their wonderful interpretation of this episode, which has opened my eyes to many things I didn't see. And to the wonderful chat, as always, including Lieutenant Indoor Cat, who's been a wonderful moderator. As they all
Thank you for being here to moderate for this one particularly, I think, for the risk of spoilers and, because the subject matter is more serious than the majority of episodes we've done so far. Thank you very much for being here for this one.
It's greatly appreciated. We will aim to be back in a couple of weeks' time. Actually, I'm a bit concerned that in a couple of weeks' time I might not even be here.
It's the summer. There's loads happening in the next few weeks, but we'll come back when we can. We'll let you know.
When we can. So, yes, as always, thank you so much. Thank you for following Deep Space Wine, and we shall, I guess, see you all again very soon. Take care, live long, and prosper. Good night.